Okay, welcome everybody. I'm just gonna quickly, let's see. I'm gonna quickly introduce what's happening here today and tell you a little bit about the presenters, what the presenters are going to be presenting on, so that you have, some basic knowledge of what to expect today. Okay. So everybody knows that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev was one of the most influential of the Hasidic rabbis. He's credited by many of bringing Hasidism to central Poland. So that's in and of itself, pretty powerful stuff. And we're doing this in conjunction with Reb Shlomo's Yahrzeit, which is Monday night, Tuesday. And I also would like to thank Joy Fishman, who's sponsoring a series of events in memory of her son, Jonathan Stampler, who also passed away around this time. Okay. So I want to share with you, is the sound better now?
Yes.
Give me okay, great, thank you. I want to share with you a little bit about who Rabbi Levi Yitzchak was and a little bit about his work, the Kedushas Levi, why I picked him of all the different rabbis. He's not the founder of Hasidism. He's not even the Rebbe that I study the most or think is the most innovative. And there's an echo. Please mute yourself because somebody else is we're hearing a reverberation from somebody else. And I'll tell you a little something. I did a recording for the month of Tishrei, and I prepared Divrei Torah. Prepared a lot of Divrei Torah. And then I go to the studio. It's Rosh Chodesh Institute. There's a good friend of mine, Mark Noble, who plays music while I teach, and Eli Schwabel does this great recording, and it's really wonderful. If you have a chance, listen to it. It's called the Rosh Chodesh Institute. And all of a sudden, I just felt like these stories of Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev just kind of took me over. And one after another, I would give a Torah, then I'd tell a story of Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. I give another Torah, I'd tell another story of Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. But the thing is, it wasn't the plan. I actually had rarely written down notes of what I planned to say. And despite my plan, the stories just kind of came into me, went through me. And that's when I realized that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak is connected, at least to me, and I think to a lot of people, on a very deep way, a very primal way, a very almost inexplainable way, that the question is why? What is it about Rabbi Levi Yitzchak that just kind of grabs our attention and holds on to us and doesn't let go? It could be simply the stories. We were told repeatedly that he's known for his Avas Yisrael, for his advocacy of the Jewish people. And in fact, Rabbi Shlomo Katz, he's going to talk about the legend of his role as the advocate of the Jewish people and try to see whether or not that actually will be found within the text, within the body of the work of the Kedushas Levi, of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev. So we're going to have that covered as a thing in and of itself, both the legend and the literature, the sacred writing of the Kedushas Levi, to see how they add up. And definitely that's part of the appeal of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev. Just to give you a little bit of a historical overview, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev passed away just over 200 years ago in the town of Berdichev. The town of Berdichev became, at one point, had the biggest Jewish population in the Ukraine, with about 60,000 people. Didn't have that many, 60,000 Jews. Okay, so it was a very Jewish town. In the time of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, it was probably more like 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people. And then it just grew and grew and grew. It became a banking center. Eventually, the banking went to Odessa, and eventually the town of Berdichev was devastated and exterminated by the Nazis who took it in 1941. But his name became really connected to the town of Berdichev because that was the place that embraced him. Even though there were arguments between the Hasidim and the Misnagdim, he ultimately got the upper hand. The two towns before that, he wasn't so lucky. He was run out of town. But what I'd like to suggest to why Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev is so special is that he wasn't just a great Rabbi. He was also a great friend. And he was also central to the Hasidic movement. And let me explain to you what my theory is. It's a question about what leadership is. And the standard version is a leader is the one that creates leadership. But there's another theory out there which says when somebody has an innovative approach to something, a solution to some problem that other people are reluctant to try, or an outlook in life that could lift people up or direct them, it's the first follower or followers, the people that believe in that leader, that are equally, and maybe even to some degree, more important than the actual leader. A leader who doesn't have a follower is not a leader. In fact, this concept is not a new concept. It's a basis of Kabbalah and Hasidus on what Rosh Hashanah is. We're approaching election day on Tuesday. According to the Hasidic understanding, Ein Melech B'lo Am. The ultimate leader is the king. The ultimate leader is God, but there is no God as king, as leader, without a follower, without a people. So to me, the beginning of the sanctity of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak is not his leadership. It's his being a follower. It starts with him being a follower. He was the embodiment of a chassid and a disciple of the Maggid of Mizrich. One of the closest to his love for the Maggid was just beautiful and very, very deep. And in fact, one of the things that also attracted me to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev, he was the first Hasidus that I learned seriously outside of Chabad Hasidus. Both Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev and Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhensk, Kedushas Levi and Rabbi Elimelech respectively. And one of the reasons for that is growing up in the Chabad yeshiva system, there was a tremendous respect, of course, for the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mizrich and all the Chabad Rabbeim. It goes without saying. But yeah, we need everyone to mute because some people are not muting and we hear the background noise at the radio. So eliyahu, if you could help out with that. So getting back to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev as a chassid and what I remember in the Chabad yeshivas is he was pretty much, with the exception of Reb Zusha, maybe a little bit of Rabbi Elimelech, the only non-Chabad Rebbe that was given almost as much respect as one of the Rebbeim. Tremendous amount of stories, tremendous amount of
there are a lot of scenarios here. We don't know. But I have noticed an uptick in media reaction from Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity in recent days. An uptick even higher than the usual amount. Let's take a look. Reporters.
Okay. Eliyahu, can you please find the person who's got their
I'm not a
phone,
host. I can't.
the thing
I can't
not
mute
on
anyone.
mute and ask them to mute their phone? I can't do that right now.
I'm not a host.
Oh, I thought I
Or
made
you
you
can mute
co-host.
all. You can mute everyone.
Well, I'm going to mute everyone then, but I do want to make you a host, Eliyahu. Let's see how I do that. Thought I made Eliyahu a host. Okay, anyway, in the meantime, it looks like the noise went away. I'll make Eliyahu a host when I'm done with this session. So getting back to this concept of what we're talking about here, I found the mute all button. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you all. You're all muted. Getting back to this concept of what made him such a great student. So what's the reason why he was so respected within the Chabad movement? It's because it was understood that he was a close chaver, a friend of the Alter Rebbe of Chabad. He was somebody that the Alter Rebbe of Chabad respected. They were often partners in crime in various stories, good stories. And his love of the Jewish people was so legendary that any potential conflict over turf, over ideology, is pushed aside to totally accept him and to totally give him the respect that's usually reserved only for the Chabad Rebbeim. Now, it's not just Chabad. Almost every Rebbe in his lifetime, with a few exceptions, he had some run-ins with Baruch of Mezhebush, I believe it was, who was maybe a little bit jealous of the fact that everyone loved him. And today, almost every Hasidic group venerates Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev. And I think it goes back not just to his role as a Rebbe, but it can even really be traced back more to his role in cementing the Maggid of Mizrich as the preeminent leader of the Hasidic movement, that somehow he was, I believe that they were a band of brothers that was like nothing else since the students of Rabbi Isaac Luria. They were the most explosive group of students to ever, within the last 200 or 300 years, bring a movement into fruition. And I believe of those people, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev played the central role as a peacemaker, as a reconciliator, and as a role model to his peers. So that's what I think makes the Alter Rebbe, not the Alter Rebbe, Freudian slip there, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev, not just an exemplary Rebbe, but also an exemplary Chassid that we, to some degree, base all of Chassidism on. Now, I want to share with you one of the crazy, wild things that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev was able to do. And we're going to hear more about this from the other speakers, such as Shimona, and he's going to be our next presenter. So one of the key tenets of Kabbalah that never really fully materialized for some reason, like it started in the Zohar, but it didn't really materialize even with the Ari, but somehow became more substantial with the advent of the Hasidic movement, is the project of reinterpreting the entire Torah. What is the project of reinterpreting the entire Torah? What is the methodology of this interpretation? The key component is
Lost it.
there's one person who I can't mute, so if you can please mute yourself. Okay.
It may be people on the phone, and there's a special code for doing it.
Oh, it's the phone. Yeah.
So if the people on the, I don't know what the code is.
Star 6.
So if everybody on the phone can do *6.
Okay. I don't understand why Zoom stock is going so up. It's a terrible thing. Just there's nothing better, but it's terrible. They got like, you can mute everyone, but not everyone. Only these people, not those people. Like they got to figure out a way to mute should be mute,
Skype.
Yeah, no, I don't think you could get, a lot of people on Skype at once, but maybe I'm wrong. Okay. So what's this idea of the reinterpretation of the whole Torah? It's basically this concept that each of the biblical figures is an embodiment of a divine attribute, what we call a sephira, which is a divine attribute at its source, and then in its manifestation becomes a human attribute that can either be a mirror to the likeliness, like the verse that says we're created in the divine image, or it could be a disruption, a shattering of the vessel, a tzimtzum, a withdrawal, a galut, a exile. And if I could just share two Torahs briefly, and then I'm going to hand it over to Shimona, who will continue. And the two Torahs are as follows. One is the Torah that we just read in last week's Torah reading yesterday, that it says that God tells the 212 number 768. I got it. Okay, I finally found all the phone, or some of the phones. Okay, great. So it says that go from the place that you are, and I'm going to bless you, and then it says that he's going to have all these good things, and the Talmud, the rabbis say that what he was being told is a foreshadowing of the Amidah, which starts with Elokeinu, Elokei Avotenu, Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. God is mentioned specifically, individually, for each of the patriarchs, right? Question is why? Why not just say Elokei Ha'avot or Elokei Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov? And the answer is that each, and this is based on the Zohar, is that Avraham is the attribute of chesed and kindness, and Yitzchak is the attribute of gvura, severity, judgment, and Jacob is the attribute of tiferet. So we're actually individually mentioning the three sefirot within God individually, even though it's all one God ultimately, but we recognize the God as manifest the archetype of chesed of Abraham. And then the Talmud says I would think that I would conclude with Magen HaAvot, with the shield of the patriarchs, but no. Abraham is told by God in this kind of vision, we're going to conclude with you, Magen Avraham. What does that mean? Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev asks. And here's the following answer. You might argue, it is being argued today, that just like there's a loving God, there's the way of the Baal Shem Tov, the way of the Magid, the way of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev, the way of Reb Shlomo, and so many other great Rabbeim that emphasizes the love. There's another way to God, which is to emphasize the fear, to emphasize the element of reward and punishment, even more the punishment. There are many people I know that are damaged because in their yeshivot, they were scared, were taught to fear God in a way that maybe they weren't healthy to begin with, or maybe they're just unhealthy now because of it. It put something that psychologically was dangerous into them. And look, there's blame to be cast about everywhere and anywhere. So I'm not saying, we've got the right way. We all got it wrong in some level. We all have to fix ourselves. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev says, why did we say that we conclude with Magen Avraham, is because I might say each way of God is equally good. If you want to focus on the Gevurah of God, if that's your emphasis, go do it. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says, no. Gevurah has its place, but the point of the Gevurah has to always conclude with Magen Avraham. It has to have a conclusion to feel love. If fearing people about God's anger or divine punishment doesn't make them feel ultimately that it's really about being loved by God, then you don't have a real shaychus to what the Amidah, what our main relationship with God really is. So that's one little Torah, beautiful Torah. And the question is, and there's so many of these, but this is like one beautiful example, one of my favorites actually. Why aren't there more like this until the Hasidic movement? How many hundreds of years did it take for people to take the Zohar and run with it? And the answer is that you could have somebody having a little medrash party. There's a lot of people now, they make their own medrash. They have bibliodrama and create your own medrash. The question is, what happens with that medrash? Does it enter into the consciousness of the people? And the answer is, for the most part, no. We know there are creative people. We know that people can make things up, can imagine things, but why would I care about somebody else's creativity if they don't have spiritual authority or integrity in my eyes to be able to want to hear what they have to say? So the answer is 99.9% of people making up medrash. It's just a very good technique for their individual chabura to be creative, and that's beautiful, but it's not going to become canonized into a sefer that's going to be studied in 500 years from now, unless that person is venerated, unless that person is a Baal Shem Tov or a Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev. So the answer to the question is, for some reason, it took the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid, and even more to some extent, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev, whose book, the chiddush of his book, is that it was waiting for 500 years to be written, and it took him to write it. In a sense, it's very middle of the road. It's not the creative explosion of Likutei Maharan, of Rav Nachman of Breslov. It doesn't even have the hyper emphasis on lifting up the tzaddik of Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhen's magical book, The Normally Mouth, that we're going to hear about from Professor Sharon Flatto, who's going to compare that to some of the other contemporaries, like the Alter Rebbe's view on tzaddik, the tzaddik. It doesn't even have so much juicy quotes of the Baal Shem Tov, like the Degel Machane Ephraim, the grandson of Ephraim Sudlikov, the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, or the Mar Einayim, that also has these kind of juicy quotes of the Baal Shem Tov. It doesn't have as many of those. What does it have? It has the essence of the transition from the Kabbalistic kind of high elite concept into the people. And it's not just in the book form, it's also in who Rabbi Levi Yitzchak was. That's why it entered into a book form. That's why it entered and became part of the canon of not just the Hasidic world, but even the non-Hasidic world now. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev is a favorite book to have at a person, Hasid or not, Friday night table, to study a nice vart on the Parsha from. And it entered into the world because Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev embodied what he spoke about. He was a living example. People have made this, it's a very obvious idea that people have said, look, people like the Ari became the Ari, not just because they were innovative and creative, but because even in their own lifetime, they were revered. They were seen as tzaddikim. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, we can say the same thing about. And there's a lot more to say, but then we have a great lineup today. Really happy to be able to have with us today Shimona Tzukernik and I'm going to unmute everyone just so I can find Shimona. And Shimona is going to be teaching. Hi, Shimona. How are you?
Good. Thank God. Glad to be here.
Okay, good. So I am going to make you a co-host.
Thank you.
And I'm going to pin you. And I'll just say
Don't pin me.
that really excited that Shimona is going to be here with us. Do you want to be able to see if you could share things when, and if you can't, eliyahu will share the text.
Yeah,
that you
hold
sent.
on 1 second. Let me just close a couple of things down, turn my phone off, and now this is the first thing. Yeah, I'm good. How's that? Everyone can see?
Oh yeah, very much so. I'm going to mute everyone unless you ask, unless you want to unmute people. Okay. And if you're on a phone, please mute yourself.
Okay, so can I begin?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to stop the share just because I'm not up to this yet. We have a couple of things that I will be sharing. And folks, I know that our time is very short today. I'm so happy to be here on this call. I've had COVID for 2.5 weeks and I was in hospital and I didn't think that I'd make it, but thank God I'm here and feeling really good. So this is like my initiation. You guys are my space that I'm coming back into connection, and it's really wonderful to be here. What we're going to do, I went through like a number of passages from the Berdichev, and I was thinking, oh, let's do something about Chava and then Sarah and Rivka and Rachel, etc. Let's do the woman. But as I was searching, I went back to what I had found in the beginning, which is a beautiful commentary of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak on the verse, Yahrzeit mi Eden, that a river went out from Eden, to water the garden, and from there it divided into 4 other rivers. And that was the, I'll just share that with you briefly. This is the context for the verse that we're going to be learning. So you can see over here in the Hebrew, the river went out to water the garden, and Misham Yipored, and from there it divided, it split. V'hoyu la'arba'o roshim, and it became 4 heads. Now, it's interesting because 2 of these rivers geographically have different sources. It seems that they might combine, but not that they originate in one delta. So I've always been fascinated by these rivers, but I haven't done the research ever to see exactly, what are the opinions of where they are. There is an idea of Eden Ayin Loiva also that no eye has actually seen Eden. The garden where they were was the Gan Eden Mikeden. It was planted to the east of the garden, but actually Adam and Chava were not in the garden. And there's something about that in terms of our own consciousness. There's a state, a way of being that we have not yet accessed, that place of enlightenment that is connected with Eden, and also ultimate pleasure. The word Eden is connected with Edna, which is pleasure, something very luxurious. Also, Adin is something that is refined. I think that linguistically the word hedonist is connected with Eden because it has to do with this idea of ultimate pleasure. And whatever pleasure we have experienced, we haven't come to a place of the ultimate pleasure. And also, pleasure comes and goes, and that's what makes it pleasurable, is the flux and as much as we dislike it, the interspersing of times of darkness or pain, etc. I think the Gemara says, Tainuk Tmidis Ein Tainuk, consistent or ongoing, perpetual pleasure is not pleasurable. So we have this idea of a location, both geographical and in consciousness, that no one has really seen. And then there was this garden to the east, and a river went out from Eden to water the garden. And what Reb Levi Yitzchak does is he brings two interpretations of what that means in terms of the pleasure principle as it applies to mitzvahs, and that's what we're going to try and go into. I just want to give some context to this idea of a river going out from Eden to water the garden, and also a Mishnah that Reb Levi Yitzchak brings. So just for those who are interested, those four rivers, Pishain, Rashi says, he brings two interpretations. The one is that it's connected to the idea of Pishtan, which is flax, and then before that, he brings the idea of Ufoshu, that the riders increased. So there's this idea that this particular river got stronger and stronger. Most rivers do, right? They start in their source and then they get stronger. And then we're told that where that river flows is also the land of gold and crystal and onyx stones. And then there's another river which was called Gichon, and Gichon Rashi connects to the idea of Yigach, which is an ox goring, the strength of it and and roaring as it rolls along. I mean, most of us know the Euphrates, Nahar Pras. The next river is called Hidekel. I don't know, what do they call it in English? The Shul river is Tigris. So maybe this is because people kind of follow it. If you're looking at Parshas Lech Lecha, the geographical location of Gan Eden was near Basra, where Saddam Hussein was found, and then you follow that river up. He followed the river near to where Aleppo was. So he was born in Ur Kasdim and came to Aram Naharaim, which is in Syria, Aleppo, etc., and then followed that south to come to Eretz Yisrael. That is this river. The Tigris, I think, is that one. That's the Hidekel, and Rashi gives a beautiful explanation there. He says they were chad v'kalim, they were light, they were sharp, and they were light. The waters of that river, I've actually seen pictures of it. It's very beautiful color. And then the last river that he brings, which is particularly connected with the land of Israel, is Nahar Pras. All right, so this is, and he tells us this mentioned in connection with the land of Israel. All right, so what I wanted to give it, that's just the geographical and the biblical context to what Rabbi Yitzchak is going to be speaking about, but I wanted to mention something that I once thought struck me very profoundly, and I found that the Berdichev's teaching gave me a lot of insight on this. There is a beautiful story about the Baal Shem Tov. I think that we're all familiar with it, where we are told that his soul ascended on high and encountered Mashiach, and he asked him, Ka'asimar, when is my master coming? And the Baal Shem Tov, the holy Mashiach, told him, today, if you listen to my voice, etc. And there was a back and forth dialogue, and then he was told, when your wellspring spread outwards. And that's something that we have seen over the past 500 years, certainly. Teachings of the Baal Shem Tov have spread far and wide. They have become part of mainstream culture. And that certainly positions us for global transformation. I once saw a commentary of the Lubavitcher Rebbe on the story of the Baal Shem Tov, and he said, what it's talking about, the Mayan, is always consciousness. There is this water, the brain is not water, but it's surrounded, it's encased in these liquids that become the cerebral spinal fluid. And he says the idea of when your well springs go outwards is that you have to take your consciousness and bring it into your life. Don't allow your learning to remain up here. The entire purpose of your learning is to transform your lives. And that's a lot of what we're going to see about the river going out from Eden. There's a place of delight and pleasure, Eden, and there is hashpah. The river is hashpah, influence, that moves from the highest levels of our consciousness into the garden. And the garden is all the worlds and our lives as well. I just wanted to mention as an aside there as well, there's a couple of contextual things that I think will help us to go through Rebbe Levi Yitzchak's teachings quite rapidly. It's very simple once we have the contextual background. There is a beautiful teaching on intimacy, on sexual intimacy by the Rebbe Maharash on Parshas Ki Tazria. And what it's also looking at this idea, as we always should, is take the Torah miloshen herot, from the word instruction. It is a map of our inner world, of our being. So the Rebbe Maharash, Rabbi Shmuel, says that everything that we create in this world is modeled on the way God created the world, and he created it first light, then water, and then the firmament. If you're looking at the original story of creation, or Mayim and Rakia. And he says that is how a child is conceived. Our sages tell us from the brain of the father. What does that mean? That in the consciousness of the father, well, the white of the brain and the seminal fluid, the white of the seminal fluid are connected one to the other. And he says the light that is a godly light in the consciousness of the father is activated by his love for and attraction to his wife. And then this energy moves out into the cerebral spinal fluid. That's the level of water, and it moves down the spine. It is contained eventually in the seminal fluid, and then it is placed into the rakia. The firmament is the uterus of his wife. And I thought that both of these ideas, both from the Rebbe Maharash and the previous one from the Lubavitcher Rebbe about the wellspring spreading out, give us a beautiful context for what it means when we're going to be looking at this river that Rebbe Levi Yitzchak discusses going out from Eden. Now, he brings two Mishnayos from Ethics of Our Fathers, which I just want to read so that we have a context. The first one he brings, this is from Rabbi Huda Hanassi. He says, Ezoi derech l'show ha'yaver adam, which is the appropriate path that a person should choose, whatever is harmonious. Now, here it's translated as for the one who does it. Kol shehi tiferes lo hosea. Everything that is, Reb Naftali, you want to just see, can you mute everyone? Can you mute all the participants? I think that would be great. Someone's mic is a little
Yeah,
disrupted.
eliyahu will mute them. Eliyahu, please mute everyone, because when they come on, the new people, they're not muted automatically.
Okay, great. So the first thing is thank you. Kol shehi tiferes lo hosea, whatever is harmonious for the one who does it. And the tiferes lo min ha'adam, that is harmonious. Min ha'adam, it's not really literal, it's here for mankind, but it means from the person. And that's what Rebbe Levi Yitzchak is going to speak about. This beautiful reciprocal relationship that applies between God and a Jew, and this harmony and pleasure and pride that we bring about through the mitzvahs that we do. The Mishnah goes on, it actually is quite, let's just have a look at it. He says, be careful with the minor mitzvahs, with the major one. It's called mitzvah kaleb, kavachamura. A light mitzvah as a severe one. And then consider the cost of a mitzvah against its reward, and the reward of a mitzvah transgression against its cost. And then the Mishnah goes on. So the things that we are going to be focusing on is what is this idea of choosing a path in life that brings pleasure to the doer and pleasure to people. The first Mishnah he discusses is what does it mean to make a distinction between a light mitzvah and a severe one. So I want to explain those two things very briefly, and then we'll get into the text. Okay, great. The obvious question, we'll go with this first. Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, as you'll see, the participants, I think that I've got the sheet that we're going to be working from. This is the first Mishnah that he discusses. And the obvious question is, if the Mishnah is telling us, be careful with the light mitzvahs, with the severe one, it seems to be implying that there's no distinction between the mitzvahs. But the truth is that simply by saying, be careful with the light one as with the severe one, means that we are saying that there is a distinction. So is there or is there not a distinction? Now, there clearly, halachically, from a legal perspective, there are, because some mitzvahs carry the death penalty. This almost never happened. The criteria for that to be enacted were so severe that it almost never happened. The Talmud says if it was enacted once in 70 years, that was called a bloody Bezdin. Rabbi Akiva, who is a lover of Israel, he actually has a different opinion on that. But this is in general just looking at the idea that there are mitzvahs that are more severe or not. There's another category of punishment. From the punishment, we could tell how severe it is. So there might be kares, which is that a person's soul is cut off from its supernal root, and so on. And then there were lashes of, there was financial penalties that people had to give. So you might have to pay compensation, etc. clearly, halachically, there were different distinctions between the mitzvahs. What I would like you to kind of hold as we go into this text is this idea. Every mitzvah has two components to it. One is called the Or Makif, the encompassing light, and the other is called Or Mamale, the imminent light. And what that means is as follows. The encompassing light, at the level of the encompassing light, every single mitzvah is the same. Because it is an expression of the will of the Creator. So, like the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya says, if you wanted us to chop wood, we'd chop wood. Rabbi Yitzchak of Berdichev said, I don't want your upper Gan Eden, I don't want your lower Gan Eden, non-dechalein. I just want you. It doesn't matter what you tell me to do. You could tell me to meditate and be in ecstatic prayer for hours, and you could tell me to chop wood. It's irrelevant. All I want is to connect with you. And at that level, it's quite irrelevant what the specific of the mitzvah is. On the other hand, every mitzvah has its imminent light, and it allows us to connect with God in a very unique and specific way, and it also allows us to refine our own being. So the study of Torah, the giving of charity, being involved in prayer, lighting Shabbat candles, binding tefillin, etc. All of these are specific paths, and there are distinctions between the mitzvahs. So that is one context that will allow us now to launch into the text. I want to just pull up the text in case, I think I had sent it to Naftali. Just give me a minute, folks. Sorry. Naftali, do you have the text? Maybe you can pull it up.
My son will share it.
Okay, great, because mine, I had it on the phone. You want to pull that up? I'll stop my share. And I see in the meantime there are a couple of chats. Thanks, Toby. Amen. Arlene, what are those Hebrew terms for light? The one is Or Makif, the encompassing light, and the other is Or Mamale, the imminent light. So lahakif, like we make hakafot on Simchas Torah, is when we encircle the bimah. There is a light that is so awesome and infinite, it cannot be captured by the individual mitzvah. It's just about connecting to the divine will. And then there is Or Mamale, Lemale, Lemalot is to fill something up, and that is the light that fills something. Interestingly, if you want to think about that in terms of the body, there could be a stroke, God forbid, and let's say an arm loses its functionality, but the arm continues to exist. And the reason for that is that there's an encompassing light and an imminent light in everything in the body as well. So the encompassing light sustains the existence. The arm is still there, but the imminent light, which allows the arm to move or to grab hold of something, is no longer there. It's not connecting from the brain to that particular organ. The same would apply, God forbid, if there was a stroke to the eye, a person could lose their sight or to hearing, etc. But the organ would still be there. Interestingly, over time, that the body does decay somewhat. So you can see that there is, even at the level of the Or Makif, the encompassing light, there's going to be some limitation for the, when the imminent light is compromised, the encompassing light is also compromised. Okay, great. Naftali, I don't know what your son's name is, but what's his name?
Eliyahu.
Hi, Eliyahu. Thank you so much. So can I ask you just to scroll on this image and you'll see where I am. Maybe you can keep the cursor where the image is. We have to be at the top. It says the Nar Yotze Mi'eden Lahashkos Es Hagan. It's further up on this page. If you could just slide that along. You with me? Okay, we're going to the full thing. All right, so I'm gonna keep on reading because I don't want to lose time. I know that we have very little time, and eliyahu, once you've figured that out, you'll show it to us on the screen. Okay, so the Berdichev says, scroll up. Yeah, there we go. Okay, there we go. And you can, I'm just gonna, leave that here. And then you can show people where we are, maybe with your cursor, because I don't think that people can see my cursor. I'm reading from my book, just because I put a couple of notes there. The Nahar Yotze Mi'eden Lahashkos Es Hagan. A river went out from Eden to water the garden. Hine Amru Rabbi Seinu, our rabbis, Rabbi Seinu Zal of blessed memory, have said, and here he quotes the mitzvah, the Mishnah that I was speaking about from Rabbi, Heve Zohir b'mitzvah kalak b'chamura. Be cautious or stringent in a light mitzvah as you are in a more severe one. Because you don't know the reward of the mitzvahs. And now bear in mind what I was saying about the fact that, yeah, well, you know, if you can't differentiate, you just differentiated. And we spoke about that distinction in terms of the encompassing and the imminent light. The Berdichev is going to explain this in a little bit of a different way. And what he does in the first part of the explanation is he's talking over here about pleasure and reciprocity and how much love there exists between the people of Israel and the Holy One, blessed be He, the Holy Creator and His people. And in the first part of the explanation, what he talks about is that we need God to do anything in our lives, and he is giving us influence from the pleasure that he experiences. The second explanation is more about Hashem needing us, so to speak, and our arousal, the arousal from below. In Kabbalah, doesn't say that over here from the Berdichev, but it seems to me that he's addressing this from the perspective of Isarusa de la Eila and Isarusa de la Tata, arousal from above and arousal from below. So let's see what he says. He's going to give his own understanding of what this mitzvah means, this Mishnah means, and how it's connected to the river watering the garden. העניין הוא שאין אנו יכולים להשיג התענוג שיש לקדוש ברוך הוא מהמצוות. We cannot comprehend, we can't grasp the pleasure, oineg, right? That we can't grasp like the pleasure that God experiences from the mitzvahs. That's what I was referencing previously when I was saying at the level of Or Makif, the encompassing light, there's no ways to differentiate between one mitzvah and another. It's just God's will. This is what God desires. This is his pleasure. As we're like, don't ask any questions on a desire that a person has. So the Berdichev says when it comes to tainug oineg, and that's like the idea of, he says, when it comes to tainug, we cannot grasp the pleasure that our mitzvahs give to God. And that's in some way connected to what I said previously, which is Eden ayin lo ra'asa. No eye saw Eden, because this idea of Eden and Edna, the name Edna or the name Adina, These are names that are connected to the refinement, the pleasure, the fullness of Eden, that delight and pleasure we cannot grasp. Ella, ze anu yoidim, what can we grasp? What do we know? Hahashpo shebolonu me'amitzvos. The influence that flows to us from the mitzvahs. So we can't grasp what we give God from doing a mitzvah. You see a beggar on the street, you know, even if it's not a dime, a quarter, a dollar that you're giving the person, but you give them a hello, that you may appreciate the mitzvah, but you can't get the level of the armaket, the encompassing life, how much pleasure it gives God that you did that. Or, you know, I was ill and no ways I could cook for one of the weeks, and a friend of mine arranged food to come to the family, and every day at the door there were people bringing food. I know how much I appreciated that, and my family knows how much they appreciated that. The person may feel good about it, but we don't have a grasp on what we give God. However, what we can know, Yoidim Yadia, is I grasp it and I take it into myself, is the influence that flows to me as a result of the mitzvahs. What is the result of my doing a mitzvah? Is the fact that God sends me an opportunity to do another mitzvah. Now, I'm not going to interrupt the screen. I had actually pulled it up for you, but the Mishnah that we were looking to see further, I'm sorry, it's a different chapter. But the Mishnah says, Schar mitzvah, the reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah, and the opposite too, the reward of a transgression is a transgression. And prior to that, it says mitzvah goveres mitzvah, a mitzvah brings another in its wake. Now, the first part of that, to say a mitzvah brings another mitzvah in its wake, that is kind of cause and effect. You know, pass it forward and you do it and it keeps on growing. You do one thing, you might feel great about it, and then that empowers you or encourages you to do something else, and you do that, and then there's etc. So that's what is meant by mitzvah goveres mitzvah. One mitzvah brings another in its wake. What is meant by schar mitzvah, that the reward of the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. You are living in the heaven and hell that you create. That is something very real and tangible. You know, someone walks into a room and you feel, wow, this is great energy. This person has got great energy. You're picking up something real, because the reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah. You do something and the light that you generate shines outward, but it also shines back to you. So that's something that the Berdichev is referencing over here. He says, the tainuk we can't grasp, but we can grasp the hashpah, the influence that comes to us from the mitzvahs, both in the sense that God sends us another opportunity, mitzvah goveres mitzvah, but also at a deeper level is this idea that the reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah. And he says, God sees that we want to fulfill a mitzvah. And he gives an analogy. A father sees that his son, a child, understands something like a wise idea, right? Ideas are not wisdom. Thought, or a specific idea, this is not the same as wisdom. Chokhmah is much more abstract. In the language of the Tanya, Chokhmah doesn't have, it's more, I'm not going into that now, but it's something that is much more rarefied and abstract. So the father sees that the child has grasped a wisdom. Then what happens? He asks him about a different wisdom. I'm going to push you. I'm going to extend you. I'm going to expand your vessel. So the father sees that the kid is touching something. And then he says, okay, well, now I can expand your vessel a little bit more and give you something bigger. That's the same thing that happens with God. This idea of the reward of the mitzvah is the mitzvah, or a mitzvah brings another in its wake. God expands our vessels when it comes to studying, performing mitzvahs or studying the Torah. This is what is meant when we read the verse, a river went out from Eden to water the garden. How does he elaborate this? It became 4 heads. So there was some kind of delta from which these rivers emerged. Now, I don't know if this is a typo. Rabbi Citron, you can let me know. I think that it is. It says, in the brain, there are 40 holes or openings. I think it's supposed to be 4. There are 4 spots or spaces. Look at what he says. Because the third brain is divided into 2. So I think here what he's speaking about is the right brain, the left brain, and then the spinal stem and the amygdala. That, the Berdichev says, divides into 2. And the river, the Nahar, Hainu Hashefa Yotzemi Eden. There is a river that goes out. There is hashpa. There's some kind of influence. Now, I have always understood that river to be the spinal stem. The spinal column. But both the cerebral spinal fluid is like the source, and then the river goes out from Eden is the influence that goes out. Yotzemi Eden goes out from our highest levels of consciousness, and the Berdichev says Eden is tainug, hainu tainug. So that's the delight and the pleasure, that place that we opened up with saying Eden Ayin Loira. So there's a dimension of pleasure and delight that we have never seen. And he says over here, we cannot know the tainuk that we give to God. We can only experience the benefit that our tainuk generates. We give God pleasure, and then he gives us something else, like the parent who teaches the child another level of wisdom. As he continues to say, from the pleasure that God experiences, from the pleasure he experiences, there is an influence. It's reciprocal. There's a beautiful meditation on my website called the Divine Breath Meditation, and it looks at the in-breath and the out-breath as a dialogue with God. There's a responsiveness and a reciprocity. It's a wonderful way for us to think about our lives, both in terms of breath, but also in terms of behavior and action, speech. We give, and then we receive. I remember once coming to the Holy Kotel, and a friend of mine said to me, I had been praying for about 5 hours. I was there at the Hashkama Minyan, and by then, so probably later, it was noon, and we were going to go under the tunnel and pray together in the women's section. And she said to me, Shimona, when you come to pray, remember to listen, not only to speak. And it was really a beautiful insight for me of just being able to come back into a place of receiving. So I think that's a lot of what's happening here in the Berdichev's text, which is you give pleasure to God, and that awakens the Eden in him, and then from that comes this Hashpa, the river that goes out from Eden, Hainu HaTainuk. From the pleasure he experiences comes the influence to water the garden. And what is the garden? He says, the Hainu Gan Sadrin Sheyesh b'Torah. There are 53 parshias in the Torah. You do mitzvahs. Don't think that your Judaism is purely academic. You're doing mitzvahs, and those mitzvahs generate a river that influence, it waters your garden, it waters all your Torah learning. And not only that, so here you see, that's why I think previously it was very much a typo, because here it says it becomes 4 rivers. The influence comes to the intellect of a person, so that a person can have deeper insights, more profound, more accurate insights. That's what watering the garden means, watering the 53 sedras in the Torah and everything that is connected to those sedras, whether it is in the Holy Talmud or the tree of life, the mystical tradition, right? So that's what happens. You give pleasure to God through deed. Don't just misdeed. You give pleasure to God through the deed. And now there is this river coming out to water your understanding. And then he says, Uber mitzvahs. And you're not only going to have a river divided into 4. So there's rivers, there's waters that are going to moisten and enliven your consciousness and your learning. And there are waters that are going to water your mitzvahs. Lasos yoser b'mitzvah, yoser mitzvah cheres. I just find it so beautiful. Like, you're going to have the opportunity to do another mitzvah. It's so not reward and punishment oriented. It's so being in the moment, being in the present, of saying, wow, oh, I think I've gone over, I'm just at the end of my time. Let me try and finish this, and I'll tell you what the second part is. But this idea that I give pleasure to God and the reward is that I can serve him even better. Very remarkable. This is what the Mishnah refers to when it says Hevei Zahir. Be cautious. As we said, it's difficult to say be careful in the light one as in the stringent one, because we said there's no difference between the mitzvahs, right? So ma shayach kaloch or chamura. What's the, like, what are you talking about here? A light mitzvah, or less important one, or a more important one, chamura. The Berdichev understands a mitzvah kala to be a mitzvah that you could do on numerous occasions, like studying Torah. If you don't learn this hour, you could learn it another time. Or mitzvah chamura, what is the more severe mitzvah? What is the more stringent mitzvah? This is like a mitzvah you can do once a year. Like, be really careful. This is only once a year that you're going to sit for those 8 days in the sukkah, right? Or the mitzvah of Yom Kippur. It's on that day only. So he's saying, yeah, there are these distinctions, based on what is said in the Mishnah and in this verse and what we've discussed. The influence comes from the mitzvah itself. He says, remember, even in a mitzvah that you do every day, you're praying or you're giving your coins to charity, etc., don't take it lightly because it's a daily mitzvah. Know that this is something that is giving you hashpah. Each deed that you do, you are living inside the heaven you are creating. You generate this light and you are living inside of it. Rabbi Citron, 1 second. I just want to share that in the next section, which we won't have time to focus on, the Rebbe tells us this part that we've been looking at is that you do a mitzvah and God experiences pleasure and he gives influence to our lives. In the second part, he says God is changed, so to speak, by our mitzvahs. Even though we are small, the lowest, we're not angels, we're not angelic beings, we're so full of our own. One of my favorite isms is don't pathologize the condition of being human. We are we are limited and non-angelic and full of our shadow feelings and ways of being. Nonetheless, it is this that God desires and is elevated by. Tiferes le'oseha means when you do a mitzvah, you bring pleasure and harmony to your creator, to the one who makes everything. And he gets that min ha'adam, tiferes le min ha'adam. He receives that from the yid below. And you know, when I read it, I know that the Berdichev is known as the Ohev Yisrael. There was such a feeling of love and gratitude, being able to open my being to the hashpah, to the influence, to this river that is coming out from Eden to me on a daily basis. And secondly, to know that with all my limitations and imperfections, I am giving pleasure to my creator. Tiferes, I give him pe'er, glory, like pride, not boastfulness, but pride in the fact that I, his child, am able to make things better. All right, so I don't know if there's time for a question or not.
I think, Shimona, thank you so much. I wish there was, but I know that Shlomo Katz is in a very tight schedule. So, but thank you so much. I'm so glad that, you know, you really just gave us over a text, beautifully broke it down, showed everyone the sources, allowed everyone to come away with tools, hopefully, that not just for the beautiful teaching that you shared, but hopefully the goal of today is that people should in the future open up a Kedushas Levi, you know. And so thank you for helping people kind of break it down and see some of his
My pleasure. It's great to be on. Thanks.
And you picked a beautiful Torah, and thank you. I'm so glad you're well despite everything.
No longer contagious, even though we're on Zoom, but hopefully soon in person. We'll all be
definitely
over
better safe. And thank you so much for taking the time, even though you had a couple rough days in the last couple of weeks. I really appreciate that. You didn't for a moment. So the great thing about Shimona, she, at least to me, she never said, maybe I shouldn't do this now. You're like, you're going to do it. So thank you.
Thanks really for letting me participate. Bye, everyone.
One of the foremost teachers of Hasidus today.
Naftali, a very quick question. Is
Leon,
the Kedushas Levi available in English and a not dumbed down translation?
I think so, but I saw it like once and it looked good, but it was like 10, 15 years ago. So
okay.
I can't, it's not current, but thank you. That's a good one. So thank you, Shimona. We're going to now turn it over to Rav Shlomo Katz, who is really one of the big proponents of both the derech of Reb Shlomo Carlebach. He's maybe the foremost expounder of that in Eretz Yisrael today. And he's a big scholar in his own right and a musician in his own right, really doing amazing work, but also really doing a lot of deep work in the various Hasidic rabbis. So eliyahu, if you could pin Shlomo.
You hear me?
We hear you. We're going to get you on the screen.
Okay.
So everyone can see you. And Shlomo has a very busy day. I don't know how he does it. I thought he does only stuff virtually, but it turns out he's a full-time rabbi of a community that he's creating. And at the same time, he has a huge presence on the internet, doing things with very gifted musicians and other teachers as well. So it's a real honor that you're here with us today. eliyahu, can you please pin Shlomo? I'll do it in the meantime. I guess I did it. My son's busy. He's got other things to do, but he's doing great. Eliyahu, thank you so much for my son's helping on Zoom today. I don't know what I'm doing.
Okay. Shalom Aleichem. I'm very honored. I'm very honored to be here. This is very special to me. And I'm so thankful, Naftali, that you asked me to share a little bit from my heart. And that's exactly what we'll try to do with the short time that we have. I'm sure you sang it already. I'm going to sing it just one more time for myself. As Rabbi Naftali mentioned, we have an amazing chevra here, and we're in the midst of building our shul, and we have a community of about 90 families here in Efrat, and just wanted to, like I learned from Reb Shalom Brat, to always first check with your wife and then invite everyone that you know to your Shabbos table. So I did check with my wife, and you're all invited to come and join us whenever is good for you. And our Shabbos table awaits. I'm gonna sing one more nigun. This is an original nigun that is very close to my heart. I haven't sung it for a while. I don't know why I feel like singing it right now. But if you know it, please sing with me. Bum bum bim bim bim, ay ay ay, da da ay 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 ay, da 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 da, ay ay ay, ma bum bum bum, ay ay ay, da la li di, ay ay ay, do do do, ay ay ay. Don't hold back, sing with me, everyone. Ay, ay, ay. bum bum bim bam, ay ay ay, ay ay ay, dire dire, ay ay ay, ay ay ay, bum bum bim bam, bim bum bim, bim bim bim, ay ay ay, all right, Shekoyach, everyone. I find it funny that when people want, the first thing people say when they want to sound a little bit cool or accepted or whatnot, they always say, I'm not into labels. I'm not into, labeling people. Because then, usually people that say that they actually are into labeling people, it's just they're fighting through it, so they have to say it like that. But I think that I actually am into labeling everyone. I think everyone should be the same. I don't know why on earth it shouldn't be that everyone should be a Fabrent Berdichev Chassid. That doesn't make sense to me. It's not this thing that is threatening. It's not this thing that is weird or bizarre. It seems to me like such a lechatchila. Perhaps that may be the deeper reason why there really is no Berdichev or Chassidus today, because it's like saying, be the obvious, be the natural. But I wanted to discuss that when I was discussing with Rabbi Naftali what to speak about. So I want to discuss Dafka what does it mean to be a Berdichev Chassid? What would that mean today to be a Berdichev Chassid? And obviously, this wonderful program is connected to the Yahrzeit, to Reb Shlomo's Yahrzeit. I don't know of a greater chassid of Reb Levi Yitzchak than Reb Shlomo. And which aspect of it, the aspect of being a sanegor, an Am Yisrael, being an advocate, a defender of Am Yisrael, is what I wanted to discuss briefly. And I wanted to share two short stories that Reb Shlomo used to say, that to me present a beautiful picture into this world of Reb Levi Yitzchak Berdichever, and hopefully something that we can grab onto before we go and see a few words of text. There was a story that Reb Shlomo used to say, where a chassid, a few chassidim were walking down the street with Reb Levi Yitzchak, and the misnagid was walking from across the street, and he was walking up to Reb Levi Yitzchak when he was with some of his talmidim. And as soon as he came up to Reb Levi Yitzchak, he gave a huge spits in his face. And Reb Levi Yitzchak, nothing, doesn't even respond. And he continues walking. And his entourage, his chevra, continue walking with him for a few minutes. And then they say, Rebbe, Adkan. I mean, we know your whole thing is loving and all that, but this is already, this is horrible. This is too much. Come on. You're going to let this guy spit at you? We can't stomach this. How are you going to let this guy get away with this just like this? What a chil shem shamayim. And bichlal, forget about your own cover, but chil shem shamayim. So Reb Levi Yitzchak turned to the chevra and he said to them, I know this yid. This yid has no simcha from his Shabbos table. He has no simcha from his chevrusas. He has no simcha at all from his davening. He gets no simcha at all from his children. Did you see how much simcha he got when he spat in my face? And you want me to take that away from him? So that's a pretty insane story, because what are you supposed to do with the story like that? Are you supposed to look for someone that spits at you and try to see how happy they are? But hold on to that story for a second. It's a very special story. And now we'll go to another story. And we'll try to tie them together. And this is also this one I feel this is the secret. This is a secret of how anyone needs to be talked to today. Reb Shlomo used to say that Reb Levi Yitzchak met this Yidla that was very angry and had a lot of tainas on the Ribbon Shleimim, had a lot of tainas on God, had a lot of tainas on Yiddishkeit. And he would come to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak and bring all his tainas to the table and kvetch to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, but with anger and screaming. And there was one Sunday that he came to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak and he said, and you know, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, and that's such shtuyot, that's such nonsense, the Shulchan Aruch, and it's so outdated, and whatever his taina was. And he's screaming at Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, and Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says to him, maybe you're right. The guy wasn't sure he heard correctly. Maybe you're right. He continues. And then he continues with more tainas on Yiddishkeit, and on Hashem, and on Shabbos. And it's a little bit less loud, but he's still with the tone. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak listens to everything he has to say, and then he stops again, and he says, maybe you're right. And this keeps on happening, that this person keeps on saying all these different tainas nonstop, and he finally, like, every time he finished the taina, his tone got lower, and Rabbi Levi Yitzchak would answer and say, maybe you're right. Until basically this guy that was kvetching to him about all his problems with God basically said to him, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, what do you think? And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says, maybe I'm right. Now the end to this story would be perfect if I then told you, and this guy became Rabbi Levi Yitzchak's biggest chassid. I could say that, but I don't know if that's true. But that's not the point over here. The point is that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev's heart was so connected to the pain of other Yidden. And one of the things that causes the greatest amount of distress is self-persecution. This is something that we are gedolim when it comes to being self-persecuted, when it comes to pointing out where we're rotten to the core. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak is very aware of this. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak believed that when a Jew was complaining about God, when they were complaining about his relationship to the Torah, it wasn't a real complaint. It wasn't a legitimate complaint about something with mamashes, something actual. It was inside, there was pain over a certain place inside where there wasn't shleimus. So I bring both of these stories because similar stories happened many times to Reb Shlomo. Reb Shlomo would walk the streets of Yerushalayim, and not once and not twice was he spat at. And somehow he continued to love that person that spat at him. There's a famous story that Reb Shlomo went down to the Kotel on Tisha B'Av 1973, and word got that Carlebach was about to come to the Kotel, and a bunch of Chassidim, I mean, they're called Chassidim, but you know what I mean. They stood in his way and started mamish calling him awful names and spitting at him. Word got to the Amshinover Rebbe that this is what happened, and for Motzai Tisha B'Av, Reb Shlomo came back to the Kotel, this time with Reb Meir Amshinover. It's where he wrote one of his beautiful Nigunim V'Li Yerushalayim Ircha. And this happened quite often. But what also happened is the second story, happened to him quite often in life, is that people would come to Reb Shlomo day and night and kvetch and complain about whatever it is that was bothering them in their Yiddishkeit. And Reb Shlomo would never, ever look at them and say to them, you're completely out of your mind, you're off. There's only one type of person that Reb Shlomo did that to, and that was Jews for Jesus. If a person like that stopped in the middle of a shiur, that's the only shiurim that we have where he screams profusely at the person. But anyone else with anger and pain and tainas on the Ribono Shel, Reb Shlomo gave them the eyes of maybe you're right, until they would calm down, until they would inhale, until they would relax, and then they would go into the zone of maybe they'll become open to hearing, maybe I'm right. I believe very strongly that this light from Rabbi Yitzchak Berdichev was a very shining, guiding torch in the life of Reb Shlomo. And I pray day and night that it also is the shining light and guiding torch in our lives as well. The Berdichev stands out from all of the tzaddikim for many different reasons. Obviously, the one main one is that he was best friends with everybody. Even those that had machlokes on him, he, like Reb Baruch Medjabusher, he had shalom with everyone. As you all know, he was very close to both Reb Nachman and to Reb Shnei Zalman of Liadi. And he was constantly in the state of making shalom between people. He had such a big hashpa on the Chozeh of Lublin. I saw something by the Radomsker Rebbe. I'm sorry I don't have this to show you. I'm just going to read this out loud. I saw something amazing that the Tiferet Shlomo brings down in his sefer. This Reb Shlomo HaKohen Radomsker. I'm very biased to this sefer since my name is Shlomo. I am a Kohen, and my oldest daughter's name is Tiferet. So whenever I have a chance to quote him, I try to take the advantage of it. So he says like this in the Tiferet Shlomo, the Radomsker says that Chazal instituted that when you see a Chacham of Am Yisrael, you have to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch shechalak michachmasa lireav. Blessed is God that He gave from His wisdom to those who fear Him. Hainu sheyeshabeach veiten toda laHashem sheyesh tzadik kazeh bador. You have to give thanks to Hashem that such a tzaddik in the generation exists. Sheyuchal lishkon bo kvod Hashem mechachmasa lechalko leolam. That such a yid exists where God's divine presence can rest upon this person. So the Lubliner, the Radomsker says that the Lubliner, all 16 years that the Lubliner and Reb Levi Yitzchak Berdichev were in the world at the same time, every single day, the Lubliner spent an hour thanking Hashem that Reb Levi Yitzchak Berdichev exists. Crazy. He spent an hour every single day, just that a neshama like Reb Levi Yitzchak Berdichev came into the world. The more that we see how tzaddikim were so mispal from him, we're so completely blown away from him, it really causes us to ask the question, what is this inyan of being a sanegor, of being an advocate of Am Yisrael? Where did he get this from? Now, of course, the concept of being a defender for Am Yisrael is a wonderful, beautiful thing that we would all love, absolutely love to embrace, and that it should become part of the way that we are, our natural way of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. But it's really not that easy. As much as we would say that we would love to be those, to be a Berdichev Chassid, it's not so simple. What usually stands in the way between us or anyone and being an advocate for Am Yisrael? It really boils down to the difference between Noach and Avram. How Noach hears from God that people have to suffer, and Noach says the frum thing to do is to listen to God and let these people suffer, because that's Ratzon Hashem. Avram Avinu hears that God wants people to suffer, even if they are complete Rishayim, like Stone, Anshe Stone, which is like the equivalent of Atlantic City meets Las Vegas on a really good day, right? Times 500 million, and Avram Avinu can't stop crying and begging for them, because Avram Avinu is looking for schus on everyone. There are a lot of different articles that try to understand. I was going through some stuff. Where did Reb Levi Yitzchak develop? Was this a shita? Was this something abnormal? Was this like a weird behavior pattern that he just wasn't able to see bad things in people? Or was it a shita? And one of the papers that I saw, I forget by who it was written, which professor, they showed a whole correlation between the world of Reb Levi Yitzchak's Torah stemming directly from the Maharal of Prague. As you all know, the Maharal of Prague, Rav Kook said that Maharal of Prague was the father of both the Gra and of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. I mean, we all know how Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi is directly related to the Maharal of Prague, but in the Maharal of Prague, which Reb Levi Yitzchak gave haskamas on future printings of his Sfarim, the Maharal explains why he gave his Sfarim Netzach Yisrael. And the Maharal speaks profoundly about the concept of the nitzchius of Am Yisrael. Nitzchius means it could mean two things. Bimenatzeach means to win, or it can mean eternal. And it really keeps on interplaying with each other, this concept of Am Yisrael being menatzchim, being people that are winning, or people that are eternal. I want to say that Rabbi Yitzchak constantly gave over to each Jew that he met that it's in their power to be a menatzeach. They can be a menatzeach. They can be a winner. They just need one person to hear their pain and say, maybe you're right, until they reach the place of him saying, maybe I'm right. And this paper that I saw has a lot of different hakbalot. It has a lot of different pieces where it compares the world of Reb Levi Yitzchak to the world of the Maharal of Prague. But we see by Reb Levi Yitzchak the concept of being Melamed Zchus. It seems that it's much more than just this shita. It seems that it's something that is by him a Yahara Bal Yavor. It's not like an optional thing. It has to be the way it is. There's a famous Mishnah that I'm sure you all know because we say part of it every single morning in Birkas HaShachar. Elu dvarim she'enim she'adam ochel perosem ba'olam hazeh v'akeren kayemes lo la'olam haba. These are the things that a person eats from its fruits in this world, but his reward is waiting for him in the next world. Honoring your parents, doing chesed, waking up for shul, shacharis v'arvis, welcoming guests, visiting the sick, making sure a kala gets married and escorting the dead, looking into tefillah, bringing peace ben adam l'chavera, between man and his friend, between husband and wife, betalmud Torah keneged kulam, and learning Torah keneged kulam. But in Masechta Shabbos, these words of Rabbi Yochanan have a few more additional words that for some reason we don't say. Listen to this. I apologize that I just came. I thought I'd be home by now. Our dear friend, I'm not talking from home. Our dear friend Yehuda Katz just married off his daughter halfway between Efrat and Hebron, which is pretty close to here. So I just came from there, so I don't have the ability. I'm talking off the phone, but I hope it's okay. In Masechta Shabbos, Rabbi Yochanan's additional words about a person, what they do, where their reward is waiting for them in the next world, is the following. Amar Rav Yehuda bar Shila, Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Shisha dvarim adam ochel perosam ba'olam hazeh, v'hakeren kemes lo la'olam haba. There are 6 things that a person does in this world, and the reward is waiting for him in the next world. Now listen to these 6 things. Hachnasas orchim, bikur cholin, iyun tefila, hashkamas beis hamidrash, hamegadel banav letalmud Torah, raising your children to Talmud Torah, and the last one is hadan es chavero lekav schus, judging someone favorably. That's not in the lashon of that we have in our shachars for some reason, but it's amazing also when the Rambam, when he brings in the Mishnah Torah all these things, all these examples from Rabbi Yochanan, he also doesn't include dan chavero lekav schus, that a person judges someone favorably. He doesn't include it as one of these things that are clearly a yesod in Yiddishkeit. And I've been thinking about it. Why isn't this concept of judging someone favorably clearly written out and spelled out? Like, okay, I have Reb Nachman, I have a Zamra judging, Nekudas Tovos, it's all beautiful, but why isn't it so clear that Hashem says this is something you have to do? It should be clear. So as you know, many of the things that Hashem Yisbarach expects us to do without being told is because if we were told to do it, it would be shallow. It wouldn't be so special. For instance, Ve'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. What mitzvah is said in that statement, and what mitzvah isn't said in that statement? The mitzvah to love your fellow neighbor, Jew, whatever it is, that's what's said over there. But what's not said, because it's such a given, you gotta love yourself. You have to love yourself. And one of the ways we understand these things that aren't specifically spelled out is that if God needed to say, I also need you and want you to love you, it would almost be so shallow. It's almost like, and I hope I don't get in trouble with this later if my wife is watching live now or she's going to watch this later. It's those certain things that, you need to spell out. You really need to say certain things when it comes to marriage. Some say, yeah, you have to. But there are certain things that once you feel the need that needs to be said, it becomes a little bit shallow. I don't know. You can come up with any example. We can go on and on this. But what I want to say is as follows. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev by him, the fact that the Ribono Shel Olam didn't mechayev, he didn't obligate the concept of Dan is kol adam lakav zchus, other than a Mishnah and Pirkei Avos, is because it is something that is so normal by Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev. It's not optional. It's not a luxury. It's a given. It's a given like all the other things the Torah doesn't necessarily spell out, because by the Ribbon Shleilim, it's a given. There are a lot of things, there are a lot of behaviors that Reb Shlomo would act, which some would call lifni mishura sadin. But by people that are plugged into the light by Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev, those acts are not lifni mishura sadin. They are simply coming from the most inner, natural place that a person could connect to. And this was the role of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev. And there's one piece in the Kedushas Levi that it's just 3 or 4 lines that I saw that I wanted to share with you, which explains how by him it was so much more than a shita. It was absolutely a klal and avodat Hashem. This piece that I'm quoting from, for those of you that want to see it later, it's brought down in a sefer called Pitgamin Kadishim, a collection of sayings of different tzaddikim. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says like this: Ki zehu klal ba'avodas Hashem Yisbarach. Mi she'ein bo mida tova hazot lir'ot tamid rak tov v'yashar b'Yisrael. Whoever doesn't have this beautiful midah to always see the good in Am Yisrael, ve'ein bo mida tova hakdosha lesaper tamid b'shivchei Yisrael. And by you, it's not such a big thing to constantly say nice things about Yidden, about Am Yisrael. And that in your eyes, Am Yisrael isn't necessarily glorified. And you don't have the good midah to love, to be melamed zchut, and to defend Am Yisrael. Rabbi Yitzchak says, if these things aren't natural by you, if these things are not part of your Yiddishkeit, if this is not the way you're accustomed to holding yourself in this world, listen, these are really, really scary words. Yedan ne'emana, he should know clearly, shelo yiskeh kol yemei chayav lichnos bepetach sha'ar avodas habore be'emes. You haven't even walked into the door of Yiddishkeit. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says over here, being melamed zchus, judging Yidden favorably, being an advocate for Yidden, defending Yidden before the Ribbon Shalom. If that's not mamish your olive base, or at a certain point, it's become your olive base, if you're not used to looking at Yidden with einayim tovot, with good eyes, you haven't even begun. You haven't started the program. You haven't even gone into the petach hashar, into the entry gate of avodas habora be'emet. Shezeu hashar la'Hashem tzadikim yavohu. This is the Melech says, this is the gate to Hashem where tzadikim walk in. The gate where you can see that when a Yiddilah is not in tune with God, it's only because they're not in tune with themselves. Because if they were in tune with the real self, there's no way they wouldn't be in tune with God. Reb Zalman Schachter once prepared Reb Shlomo to. This is an amazing piece. I'm sure many of you have heard it because we found it on recording. Reb Zalman was going to this Torah and Dharma conference, this famous conference, where he asked, Reb Shlomo wasn't able to go. And he asked Reb Shlomo, he said, do you have any message for the chevra there? Now, obviously, he asked like 90% of the people there, what's your name? And each person has another Swami Buddha name, right? But then you ask them, like, what's your real name? And it's always, my real name, Friedman, Moskowitz, These are all Yidden, obviously. So the tape is unbelievable. This recording is unbelievable. I hope everyone listens to this. And if you want a link to it, I'm happy to send it to Reb Naftali. You could send this out. This is beautiful and so melamed zchus. Reb Zalman,
maybe more. It really heated up and absorbed everything nicely.
We're good? Okay. I'm going to end with this. Reb Zalman asked Reb Shlomo, what message do you have for people that found God through the Eastern religions, through the Eastern traditions? Now, for nowadays, being about tshuva and accepting people that came from the East is much more acceptable. But when in 1978, it was not such an acceptable thing. If someone came from a place of having inyanim with ashrams, you kept them far away from you. Shlomo said the most beautiful Torah from the Chidush She'arim, where it says in Parshas Ha'azinu, Zechor yemos olam binu shnos dor vador. You have to remember the days of old. Binu shnos dor vador. Have insight into the years of every generation. But the Chidush She'arim said, you have to have binu, you have to have bina to the shnos, to the differences of every single generation. What happened to the generation after the 6 million? Let's be melamed zchus on total assimilation. Okay, that's a big thing. Maybe being melamed zchus on assimilation. Shlomo said in the name of it, said an amazing thing. The Ishbitzer explains in Parshas Emor, and Menashe says in Parshas Emor, that a Kohen, I'm a Kohen cannot be metamet to mace, it cannot be defiled to death, and it cannot come in contact with death, because they have to be the teachers of Am Yisrael. And when you come in contact with death, the nature of person is to have anger, and a teacher can't have anger. They can't really give over to God, to people who God is. Therefore, a Kohen can't contaminate himself to death. Now listen, Chaver, this is just amazing. What happened after the 6 million? The Shlomo says it was impossible for the real seekers to give over who God really was, because all our teachers, all our Kohanim, all of us were Tumas Meis, we're Tmei Meis. So where did we go to hear about God? By teachers who weren't angry at God. Those are the teachers in the East. See what Reb Shlomo did? He's melamed zchus now on the chevra, on the teachers in the East, and on the Yidden that had to go there and get from them hashpah. And Reb Shlomo said for a number of years, these teachers from the East, 1945, were the ones who were able to give over some concept of God that way. But now Reb Shlomo said, and he said this already 42 years ago, he said, but now we're further and further away from the gas chambers, and the anger is going further and further away, and the light, love, and simcha of Eretz Yisrael is filling Am Yisrael now. Now our teachers can be Kohanim again, because we're not so much Tumei Meis anymore. So what was Reb Shlomo doing in that piece? He's not koshering Yidden going to learn in the East. That's not it. He, in my humble opinion, he is malil lekaf zchus, that whole generation that legitimately could not hear about God after the gas chambers. And what did we need after the 6 million more than anything? We need Berdichev eyes. We need Berdichev eyes, the way we look at each other, the way we look at ourselves, the way we imagine and view the Ribono Shel Olam. Because like we just learned in the Berdichev, if that is not the way that I'm naturally accustomed to thinking and looking, I haven't begun Yiddishkeit, or maybe it's like Berdichev says. It's not that I haven't become a chassid, or I haven't taken on Midas HaChasidus. The wording here is Yedan ne'emana shelo yiskeh kol yemei chayav lichnos bepetach shar avodas habora be'emes. You should know you don't merit your whole life to actually go into the gate of what's called avodas habora be'emes. You know how we look back and we say, like, could there really have been someone that existed like the Berdichev? Could it really have been someone that actually looked at every sinner and was melamed zchus on them? Or is it just one big Hasidic folklore? You know that's what they're going to say in 40, 50 years about Reb Shlomo as well, right? Was there really a person who was able to love the way that he loved? Was there really a person that was able to melamed zchus on so many lost Yidden? Could it really be? So that's why, to me, the Shul in New York is such a headquarters of of such a holy mission, which you do so beautifully and so inspiring, where when you walk into the shul, and Reb Naftali, I give you so much craft to keep on going strong. The shaila of, could it be there really was someone like Reb Shlomo that existed in the world? It's not such a question, because it's clear there was, and he continues to shine bright. And you're all continuing to do it in such a beautiful and coveted way. And it's given me, Chevra, from the next generation, so much inspiration to figure these things out also for ourselves and for our children. So may both the neshamas of Reb Levi Yitzchak ben Sarah Sasha and the neshama of Reb Shlomo ben Pasir Reb Naftali be melamdim schus in Shemaim on all of us, until there's not one Yidela who's looked down from Shemaim with eyes of judgment, but all with eyes of rachamim, until we're all back in Yerushalayim. Yirah Kodesh b'meira b'yameinu, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Reb Shlomo. Reb Shlomo should be blessed with, to be a ma'ayin miskaber, to continuously give over new Torahs and new nigunim. You have so many gifts, and Baruch Hashem that you were able to grace us with your beautiful music, stories, and Torah today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Naftali.
It was just a gewalt. Wow, I'm like gewalt. I'm gonna have to listen to that again.
Please send that
Go
link.
even deeper. It was
Please
amazing.
send that link.
I will. I'm going to send it.
They're demanding the link. They want the link.
I'll send it to you right now.
Okay. So thank you so much. And now we're going to pin our next presenter. If you notice, today we have 2 men and 2 women presenting, because one of the things that Shlomo did is he was always encouraging women to teach Torah, and we want to continue in that vein. And the 2 women need no encouragement, because they're really just very accomplished teachers in their own right. We already heard from Shimona, but we're now going to hear from Professor Sharon Flatto, who's a professor of Jewish studies at Queens College. She's also written extensively about topics mostly focused on Kabbalah, Kabbalists, Hasidim, Misnagdim, including a wonderful book that I really enjoyed on the Noda B'Yehuda, Rabbi Cheskel Landau. Eliyahu, if you could go ahead and pin. Well, I could try it, but I'll spotlight Sharon. There you go. Okay, thank you. So Sharon, we also have some. So Sharon's one of the favorites when you come to the Carlebach Shul. We always have you, and sometimes you're supposed to give an hour sheer Shabbos afternoon, and people don't want to stop, and it turns into 2 hours. I don't know that. I don't think that'll happen today, but but we're really very, very happy to have you here. If those of you noticed and read the title carefully, it's Reb Levi Yitzchak and his contemporaries, because as I mentioned earlier, that really Reb Levi Yitzchak is, in a way, he stands out simply because he got along with everyone. He stands out because he wasn't that different than the others, the way some of, like the Alter Rebbe might have been, or even potentially Rabbi Elimelech Lezhensk, who we're going to hear more about, who are 2 of his contemporaries. So with that in mind, we're going to be asking Sharon to really create a little bit of the context of what some of the contemporaries of the Alter Rebbe, of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, notably the Alter Rebbe of Chabad and Rabbi Elimelech Lezhensk, were their styles and what they were dealing with. So please,
Okay, do you hear me?
yes, we hear you.
Wondering if I get a gallery view. Oh wow, a lot of people.
Yeah.
Nice to see everyone.
or
Yeah, I
not
just
see
wanna let
everyone.
you know, before you start, Eliyahu already sent out your source sheets. I
Okay,
don't know
good.
if everyone can open them because it's quite extensive.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll also be sharing it on the screen.
Okay, great.
Eliyahu would let me be a co-host. So, and those of you who I don't see, I'd love to see your faces. I think a day in honor of Rav Shlomo is not the same if you don't really get that contact. It's sad enough that we have to do it on Zoom, but I would love to see you all. I'd love to hear you all, but I think that's a little bit complicated, but I will ask questions and then hopefully Eliyahu will let you unmute yourselves and then we'll be able to discuss as well. So first of all, I'm going to start with a Hakarat HaTov, mostly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but also a little bit to Rav Naftali. Unfortunately, I have not been well the past few months, and Naftali asked me to speak around Pesach time, and I said yes. I was more ambitious than my physical strength would allow, and I had to cancel, and then he asked me again on Shavuos, and then I think around Rosh Hashanah time. So first of all, a thank you to Rav Naftali for persisting and not forgetting about me. And then a serious hodaya that I am well enough to teach. I haven't taught in a while, and I'm very grateful for that. As my husband says, the Mishnah says that you shouldn't be proud of yourself that you study, right? That's what we're put on this earth for. We feel that way about teaching. So I'm glad that I'm back to be able to teach and share some Torah. Now that I've thanked Naftali, I'm going to give him a hard time. I somehow thought that this day was about the students of the Maggid. I didn't realize the day was devoted to Rav Levi Berdichev, but that is okay. Because part of what I want to discuss today is to what extent did this third generation, Rav Levi Berdichev is part of the students of the Maggid, to what extent were they inheritors of the Besh tradition? And to what extent did Chassidut change under their dynasties? And that's why we focus on them. Obviously, they contribute something special. And this is a complicated story, and historians love complicated stories. And part of the complicated story is that, maybe I'll ask you, how do we know about the Besh teachings? We want to know what the Besh, what did the Besh really think? What did he think about tefillah? What did he think about dveikut? What are our sources? Rav Citron, can people just, I don't know how it works.
Yes, I guess, Eliyahu, do you want to unmute everyone for?
No, I don't think unmute everyone. Maybe people raise, because I can.
People raise your hand, yeah.
Yeah. What sources do we have? Try. Maybe let me see you. Roberta Flatto, who might be, do I see a hand?
Yeah, stories. This is Linny. I think from the stories.
Okay, good. So we have a lot of stories, and that's certainly some way, don't come back.
No.
We enjoyed seeing you. So we have the stories. The most famous stories are Shifchei HaBesht. For historians, these stories are both helpful. They certainly contain a lot of historical nuggets, but they're also a problematic source. The stories really were not written as history, right? They're called Shifchei HaBesht, right? They're hagiographies, and they're stories that are meant to teach you how to conduct yourselves, how to practice. They're not meant to be, a straight narrative account. So that's one. The stories are great, and I wouldn't dismiss the stories, but we have to remember that the stories were written not as historical works, but as teaching devices. You could think about it a little bit like Agadah. Also, anyone happen to know when was Shifchei HaBesht published? This collection of stories. So the Besh dies in 1760. I'll soon share my outline with you. And anyone know when the collection of stories is published? 1815. So that is 55 years, Arlene. Arlene, am I pronouncing your name right?
You can call me Lenny.
Lenny? So Lenny, that is 55 years after the Besh dies. Now, I don't know about your memory. I actually have a pretty good memory, but how many of you remember stories a week or 2 weeks later, let alone a year later, right? So 55 years after the Besh dies, you can imagine that these stories, go through some game of telephone. And the fact is we have different versions of these same stories. So we know that these stories are not, have some problematics in terms of recording history systematically. What other sources do we have when we want to know about the Besht?
I think in the comment section.
Wait, who's speaking?
Yes, it's Naftali.
Oh, Naftali.
Yes, I'm reading from Toby
please.
Weissman, who's a rabbi from Vermont. She wrote, "The best students give over his Torahs, Baal Shem Tov al HaTorah."
Okay, so one of our main problems, and this goes back also to what Lenny was talking about, is that the Besh left us hardly any writings, right? The Besh was basically a preacher, and preachers preach orally, and they tell stories orally, and then people tell stories about them. So going back to Lenny's work, the Shifchei HaBesh are stories that were told by his disciples, by his admirers, and then eventually 55 years later, they're written down. But even his main teachings, he never wrote down the way they were preserved. And remind me, Rav Naftali, who just gave the comment?
Rabbi Toby Weissman.
Okay, so as Rabbi Toby Weissman is 100% correct, the main source that we have for the Besh teachings are the teachings of his disciples. And he has two main disciples. He has Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, and the first systematic book of Chassidut is the Toldot Yaakov Yosef. We're not going to focus on the Toldot Yaakov Yosef today, maybe at another conference. And the other one that we are focusing on today is the Maggid of Mezrich. The Maggid of Mezrich actually is also known for being a Maggid being a teacher, oral, someone who transmits his teachings. And as we'll see today, that's really what he's most famous for. He's a very famous teacher. He's so charismatic and has so much knowledge that really the best and brightest flock to him. Sometimes you think about who the students of the Maggid were, and it's really astounding, right? It's Berdichev and the Baal HaTanya and the Noam Elimelech and Zusi of Anipol, just the list goes on and on. But what people may not know as much is that he also has writings. He has the Magid Varav Liyaakov, right? He has commentaries on the Torah. These are also problematic because he did not necessarily put these together as a book. These are also notes of his students. And since the day is devoted to Rav Levi of Berdichev, which of his students do you think put it together? Rav Levi of Berdichev. So when you're reading the Magid Varav Liyaakov, you have two possibilities. Either you're reading, Rav Levi of Berdichev was a really good note taker, and you're really reading the words of the Magid word for word. Or you can imagine someone would be recording Rav Citron's Torahs and maybe adding in their own, or, I didn't like that point. So who knows? Maybe Rav Levi also added a little bit, and that's one of the issues we're going to have with all of these teachings. So the Magid and the Toldot Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, the way we know that they are recording their teachers' words is they often quote their teachers. They often will quote the Besht. But, I once heard Professor Ada Rappaport, Zichron Bracha, she passed away this year. She always said, it's complicated when you're reading these texts. What is the Magid and what is the Besht? And as we all know, when you have a teacher, a Rebbe student relationship, those things start to mesh after a while. So one of the problems that we're going to have today is that even the text that we have of the Besh, most of them are written by his students. There is an exception. I'll give you a little, this is a Chazara, because I taught one of these texts at the Carlebach Shul, I think a year or two ago. There are some authentic texts of the Besh. Anyone remember? Ted?
Flatto.
Something to do with how he grew up and his background and the type of people he mingled with?
Okay, well, it is mentioned who's mingled with, but what kind of text is it?
Oh, I don't remember who it came from.
Remember what kind of, we do have some original text of the Besh written in the Besh hand. We have 4 or 5 letters. And we studied one of those letters together, Igeret HaKodesh. But that's very little. So one of the issues we're going to have today is parsing what really is the Besh and what are the teachings of his disciples. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. I don't know how many of you, maybe show of hands, how many of you received the documents before class? Okay, so if you have them, if you could print them out, that would be the best. But if you don't, second best is I am going to open it and share it with you on the screen. Sometimes my students take a picture of it. That might be the best way to go, because I think this will just help you through the class. So just very quickly, today we're going to talk about 3 stages of Chassidut. The first stage is the stage of the Besh, and that ends, it's hard to give dates and periodization, but if you're talking about figures when they die, that's the end. So the Besh is revealed around 1736, but 1740 is a nicer number. And he dies in 1760. And he clearly has new teachings and that are later called Chassidut. In the beginning, they're referred to as the new Chassidim, right? They're old Chassidim. And certainly some impressive students gather around him. And one of them is the Maggid. The Maggid, so maybe we'll just start here. So just very quickly, just to do a chazara and to have you all on the page, because I know you've been conferencing for a long time, so you might be tired. If you had to distill the best teaching, what is he most known for? What did he bring to the table that caused followers to come to him? No, but now I can't get the full screen, so I'm not getting all of you. Eliyahu or Naftali, is someone, if you see a hand, maybe call on them?
Okay. Anybody want to either raise a hand or write a comment?
Don't be shy. We need you.
I'm not good at this. Eliyahu, help out over here.
I don't understand.
Why don't I see everyone?
Because you're on the shared screen. You have to know what
okay.
button to press.
Okay. Rav Naftali, just help us. I don't know. Daniel Goldschmidt, I happen to see you, so you're in trouble. Daniel, if you had to say one thing that the Besh contributed to Judaism, or that made him attractive, that followers like the Maggid would come to him, what would you say it is? No, wait, I'm not hearing you.
So I before Danny gets ready, I see a couple people did make comments. One is Arlene, who wrote stories, meaning the Baal Shem Tov, but that was what the Baal Shem Tov's Chiddush is. And
okay, but again, Arlene, what I said before, it's true. Clearly, he disseminated his teaching orally, and one of the ways is the stories. We don't know to what, the stories that we have, we don't know how many of them he told or people later told about him.
I would say that the biggest thing.
Yeah, but yeah.
That's Danny.
I would say the biggest thing is that every Jew can have a direct relationship with God and the simplicity or the sophistication should not be a boundary or factor, but that you could have a direct relationship with God.
Daniel, I feel like I planted you because what you said, first of all, is the classic answer. So thank you. And I'd say if you read most Hasidic works, most academic works on Hasidut, they'll say exactly what you said. You're going to see that that's really the topic of today's conversation. That's really, you hit on the topic. To what, so even before we get there, but you really
More,
hit
by
it,
the way.
and I think I even wrote it at the bottom of the first page, or you'll see it of the handout. That's the question of today's shiur. To what extent were the best teachings meant to be populist for everyone? And to what extent were they, was he still speaking to a spiritual elite? That's, you just asked the $100,000 question. Or whatever
Sharon, just if I could read a few more, because you got a bunch of responses. They're all
yeah,
short.
but I just want to respond to Daniel. But what I want to know is more, right? Maybe my question wasn't specific enough. I'm talking about the ideas. What ideas did he transmit to everyone? Yes, Naftali.
I'll just read them quickly. Toby Weissman, the best joy, serve Hashem b'simcha. Shai Yellen, that you don't need to be a huge Talmud Chacham to be a holy Jew.
So Shai's also touching on the same issue Daniel
Arlene
is touching on, and I'm going to leave that with a question mark still.
Serve God with, okay, so that's what you're doing. Faith by Jody Teicher. He wants teaching faith.
And also, I'd say the most obvious one you're missing. What do you, I guess we haven't been in Shul for.
Tefillah.
Yeah, prayer, right? The famous story of the Maggid. The Maggid happened to be, and Daniel and Shai, this is what complicates things. The Maggid was a first-rate Talmid Chacham. He was not a simple tin. He was not a lay person. And one of the famous quotes about him, and also people tell the same story about Shneur Balatanya going to study with the Maggid. He said, I know a lot about learning. I know almost nothing about davening. I need to meet the best, right? And there are a lot of stories how when the Maggid goes to the best, right, at first he doesn't get it. What's so great about the best? Maggid's actually much more learned, much more sophisticated, knows much more shas. It's only after experiencing more time with the Baal Shem Tov does he realize, yeah, but when he learns, there's sparks and angels in the house, right? So it's not about the intellectual, Daniel. It's also about, as you would say, it's also about the emotional capacity. And so that's certainly what's central to the best teaching. There's no doubt, right? That this emphasis on, if you want to put it into maybe one word, on dveikut, right? On cleaving to God, on that personal relationship, especially attained through tefillah, but also through learning. And certainly that is what distinguished him, not necessarily a scholarship. In terms of how simple a person the best was, clearly if you read the stories, right? He's always a balagala, he's driving a wagon. But if some of you have kept up with more recent scholarship, especially of Moshe Rossman, who's done archival work and found that the best was actually on the payroll in Mezbush. He wasn't such an outsider. He wasn't necessarily a balagala, and he earned a decent salary. He wasn't living hand to mouth. So that story of him being, poor and completely uneducated, it seems that has been debunked. But certainly he was not a top scholar like the Maggid was, and that's what's going to make today's class so interesting. The Maggid clearly changed the movement because the Maggid does come with that Talmid Chacham gravitas, and because of that, many students flock to him. It's one thing to say davening is more important than learning if you're not such a good learner, but if you're a very good learner and you're saying that really the focus should be dveikut, that's more compelling. So the big question, and we're not going to discuss that now, is how big a movement did the Besht have? So certainly if you read the early works, right, Dubno, Gretz, Shalom, you get the feeling that he's speaking to the masses, and therefore what Daniel and Shai said is he's basically saying everyone can attain dveikut, right? Everyone can engage in this kind of prayer. If you follow the more recent works of Ada Rappaport, Moshe Rossman, they tend to say, you know, the Besht himself was not, you know, from the poorest, uneducated level. This was not a grassroots movement. This was still somewhat of an elitist movement. What was new was the message. Okay, now we come to the Maggid. I'll let you talk a little bit. What would you say is characteristic of the Maggid's court? So the Maggid was, the two most famous students were the Maggid and the Toldot Yaakov Yosef, and as Rav Citron alluded earlier, unfortunately students don't always get along, so there was a bit of tension there. And Rav Yaakov Yosef was actually the older student, so he's a little resentful that the Maggid really became the main transmitter, but that's how it worked. So what would you say the Maggid is known for? You know, do you want, should I keep the shared screen on? Because if I guess
organizing.
If I have it, I can't see you. Can I stop the share for a moment?
Yeah.
I'll come back to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the Maggid was known
Citron
for.
said he tries to get women speakers, so we should also get some women participating. So please, yes. But that's okay, Daniel. Continue.
Okay, I was going to say that he's not. I think he was known for being a better organizer and making it more permanent and getting it out there with many different disciples in different areas.
Right. So I don't know, you know, we're not going to compare him and Rav Yaakov Yosef, but certainly his strength is as an organizer. If some of you are impressed with Chabad and they're, you know, how they send out shluchim and how they're this mass organization, it's not coincidental, right? Rav Shneur Zalman was a student of the Maggid. The Maggid actually sent out missionaries. You know, many of us think missionaries, well, that's not a Jewish thing. But the Maggid sent out all sorts of people to spread the word. And the word was that the focus of Judaism should be on dveikut, not that he was against learning. So, you know, sometimes people portray Chassidut as this unintellectual movement, not necessarily so. They just said that we have to shift the scale of values. And so he sent out missionaries. But that's interesting. The fact that he sends out missionaries, right? That's a little bit different than the Besh. And now, Lenny, I can come back to you with the stories. Here, the stories do tell you something. What do we know about how the way the Besh spread his teachings?
Well, you know, I think he did teach through stories from the heart to other people.
Okay, I agree, but how did he get those stories? How did he transmit those stories?
I mean, he did it, you know,
he didn't send out missionaries, right?
No, he did it face to face with groups of people.
How did he, you know, there was no Zoom, no telephone. How did he do it? Based on the stories.
No, right. He would come to town, I guess, in the synagogue, in the synagogue, would he? Yeah. He would gather people. And they would come and hear him,
what a Maggid was.
Even if they couldn't read.
Yeah, a Maggid is a traveling preacher.
He's a storyteller.
The notion of a Maggid is that you don't have a set synagogue. And so I think so many of those stories, the Baal Shem Tov is on the road, right? He doesn't matter, you know, if he's simple or not simple, if he has a nice carriage or not a nice carriage, he's traveling from town to town, Arlene, and spreading the word. And maybe through stories, not only stories, or maybe they even see how he davens, maybe just by watching him. But he's traveling from town to town. Interestingly enough, the Maggid of Mezrich, you can kind of intuit that he's not doing that. How can you intuit that he's not traveling from town to town? Well, now you can think of Chabad, right? How they get their word out through the shluchim, right? So the Rebbe doesn't have to go from town to town. So what gives you the inkling that the Maggid is not disseminating his teachings by journeying, by wandering? Toby.
Because it says Maggid of Mezrich, it was his name. So
okay, nice. So first of all, he's associated with a place, which is already something new. Maggid is a little bit, tricky, but he's a different kind of Maggid. And the fact that he sets up this institution of missionaries. So the Maggid, in many ways, you could say, Toby, sets up the first Hasidic court.
Could it also be that
he is associated with Mezerich, one place. And the way he spreads his teachings is, I'd say, threefold. One way is, well, people know the address. You know that if you want to learn about Hasidut, you come to him. We have journals, someone like Solomon Maimon, especially a lot of young people, right? So the way many people take a gap year now and, find themselves when they're just 18, 19, that was sometimes happening in Eastern Europe. Or maybe they just got married and needed a little break, right? So we know that a lot of young men went to the court of the Maggid. There was an address to go to. So Toby, that's really important. From Daniel Goldschmidt. Thank you. I'm seeing a comment. I'm not such a multitasker, but thank you. So the Maggid is unique in that he has a court. He is unique in that he sets up an organization to spread the word through missionaries. And that's how the ideas of Hasidut start to spread from just southeastern Poland to Volhynia, to Russia, to the West. And he also has his teachings on the Torah, with which Rav Levi of Berdichev eventually is going to put together as Maggid Varav Yaakov. So those are the main ways he spreads his teachings. Anything else you know about the Maggid or the Maggid style? Well, I already said one thing, right? That he is, in addition to being someone who very much promotes spiritual teachings, he's also a classical Talmid Chacham. And then again, that will draw a lot of people to him. What about, who said that one of the main hallmarks of Hasidut is worshiping through joy? Toby. So this is interesting. There always have to be exceptions. Anyone know, anyone have anything to say about the Maggid and joy? So I'd say one of the main characteristics of Hasidut, and I definitely agree with you, Toby, is Hasidut focuses on joy and also on the whole rejects asceticism, right? There had been a very strong ascetic line among the Kabbalists that the real way to attain dveikut, right, to cleave to God, Daniel, is to, by denying the body and just focusing on the soul. And one of the main innovations of Hasidut is that, no, people are both material, but people are both physical and spiritual, and you need to use both modes to worship God. But again, there are exceptions to the rule. Anyone know why the Maggid was different than the Besht, and that he didn't? Well, maybe he just was, his personality was different, his orientation was different. But we also know physically he had limitations and therefore could not travel in the same way.
Well, isn't the Maggid usually considered like an itinerant storyteller?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, the word Maggid in general is they weren't the rabbis who were associated with the courts and the yeshivot, but they were itinerant, exactly like you said, preachers, and they would go from town to town and spread their teachings orally. And they didn't have one base, which meant often they were also not the upper, they struggled more economically, but that's not true of the Maggid. The Maggid is in one place. And I don't know if you know this, but the first time I found this out, I was struck by it. The Maggid was very much taken with the Kabbalah of the Ari, and he was incredibly ascetic. He spent much of his life fasting. And in fact, he had fasted so much that he became disabled from it and had a hard time walking. At the end
the same thing happened to Reb Nachman.
Exception. Interesting. Here we're getting sort of a colorful view of these Hasidim. So while, again, it's always a question, to what extent are these students transmitting the teachings of their Rebbe, and to what extent are they also adding? So to be fair, the Maggid is not advocating that other people be ascetic. And so Toby, I think he is following his teacher in that he promotes worshiping b'simcha and worshiping with material goods, but he himself sticks to the old kind of ascetic regime. So that's something interesting to know. Yeah, I see a hand, Toby.
I'm just wondering, the story that, I'm not sure it's the Maggid, so, and I don't know if he lived at the same time as Reb Zusha. Did he live at the same time?
So Rav Zusha is his student.
Okay.
Rav Zusha and Rav Elimelech are brothers, and they both are actually among the first students of the Maggid. The Maggid, if you looked at your outline, lives not such a long life, but he's a teacher for quite a long while. And he has many students. So his earliest students are Rav Zusha and the Rav Noam Elimelech. The last student is Rav Shneur Zalman of Liadi. So he's a student.
It's not the story he's not in the story that I'm thinking of, but maybe he sends one of his Hasidim to Reb Zusha. And
who does, the Maggid?
I don't know if it's the Maggid that sends one of his students to Reb Zusha, so I'll just hold off.
Okay, so I mean, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, but why not? What's going to be characteristic here, I'll share the screen again of the outline. What's going to be characteristic of the third stage of Chassidut is the Maggid is going to die in 1772. And then for the first time, you're going to have a decentralization of Chassidut. So Chassidut, in many ways, the way we know it, that there are different groups of Hasidim, and each one has their own Rebbe. Now, most of these early Rebbes were students of the Maggid. So even though, you know, Rav Levi Berdichev is quite different than Rav Shneur Zalman, and they're quite different from all Jews, and so that's why we can speak about Chassidut as a whole, but there's going to be a decentralization. It's going to be, there's going a whole new world out there. Not only is Chassidut going to spread, and by the way, it spreads like wildfire. Whether or not it was a mass movement in the first stage, by the third stage, and that's not so long afterwards, right? That's a few decades afterwards, scholars debate about it, but it seems like the majority of Eastern European Jews had become Hasidic to some extent, or especially in the Ukraine, in what we call Russia now. So it spreads very fast. And the question is how and why? And again, this is the $100,000 question. Every book you read will give you a different answer. You know, was it economic? Was it religious? It's probably all of these reasons. But it does spread very fast. And so the question I want to ask today, spreads. To what extent are these students of the Maggid disseminating similar Torahs, and especially, I got to hone in because we don't have much time, especially about the tzaddik. So that's one thing you didn't mention when I said what's unique to Chassidut. I would say one of the most innovative teachings of Chassidut is this idea that there is a leader, a tzaddik, and this is a leader like Judaism has not seen before, right? He's not just a mystic. We've seen mystics before, but this is a mystic have a political, a mystic that doesn't just go onto the hilltops and try and cleave to God, right, Daniel? But a mystic that's going to use that energy to take care of his flock, and not only to take care of the spiritual needs of his flock, but to take care of the material needs of the flock. So that is a huge chidush. So to make this a little more interactive, I know it's late, I'm going to ask you all, hopefully you're near paper and pencil, I'm going to ask you all to jot down, and Daniel, you preempted me a little bit, you could see it on the outline, to jot down, you know, what do you think the essential, for you, what do you think the essential qualities of Chassidut are? We started to talk about it. And Daniel, your exact question, do you see it as an inclusive or elitist movement? And while we do that, because, right, we live in an age where everyone has to multitask, I am going to share a video of a contemporary Rebbe And I want you to say, to what extent does this clip, is it in accord with how you view Chassidut? Many of us have sort of a little bit of a narrow view of Chassidut only from the Carlebach Shul, right? But there's a whole wide world out there, right, Rav Naftali, that we might not encounter all the time. So I'm just going to give one example of an event that many Hasidim will, wait, so let me stop this share, that many Hasidim will participate in at some point in their lives. So let me get to the, 1 second. Sorry, where is it? Give me 2 seconds. I had this ready up and realized it not here. Sorry. Let me just close this first. I'm just gonna, let me exit this. I'm gonna close this first again. Sorry about this. You don't see this, do you?
No, we just see you.
Oh, you just see me. Okay. Hopefully I can, let me go back to you. I can't see you. Okay. See me?
Yep.
Lost you?
No, we still see you.
Okay. But why am I not getting the share screen?
Trying to share the screen and it's,
Is she a host?
Am I still
Yeah.
a host?
I don't see why not. Let me see if Elio can help you out here.
Yeah, what's the problem when it doesn't work?
I just need to be able to share.
What happens when you click share screen?
Yeah, no. Okay, here we are.
All right.
Sorry about that. Oh wait, why did it stop? I'm just going to give you the beginning just to get a sense of the crowd. Okay, well, at least I gave you a little bit more time. I
Yeah.
messed up with the sharing. So reactions.
Yeah, it doesn't
Probably
say
know what
much for.
I just want to say this is a mitzvah tans. This was the above of wedding, 2017. It's his granddaughter. Not going to get into the whole custom of the mitzvah tans, but as you see, the Rebbe is dancing, and clearly thousands of Hasidim are around. Maybe someone who hasn't spoken. Comments. Shai. Well, you spoke a little, but does that resonate with you? Is that how you think of Chassidut? Is that similar to what you have on the page?
So it's a little bit hard for us to relate to it. I find, it's to me, Chassidut is the Carlebach Shul dancing with everybody, not a spectator sport, but actually participatory. Here it's the Rebbe is the key person. I think we're honoring Reb Shlomo. He brought everybody into it, and I think that was something that Carlebach Hasidus offers, that it's really is for everyone, not just the Rebbe's family. We celebrate every wedding in a very special way, and I think it's still the same shoresh, but it sort of took a little bit of a different. It manifests differently.
Okay, so Shai, I feel like the tension you just articulated again, echoing what Daniel said, and Daniel's nodding his head, so he obviously agrees with you, is that there's a tension here, right? On the one hand, we think of Chassidut and Dr. Flatto, we will get to you. On the one hand, we think of Chassidut as a new kind of spirituality that's not just for the elite, that's not just for the intellectually learned. On the other hand, this doctrine of the tzaddik is quite elitist. Right, the fact that he gets special, as Shai said, right, his grandchildren get special attention, right, to be a miyuchas, right, einikel, right, in that world is certainly, right, a big thing. And not only that, what about his dress?
I think this seems to reflect something the way Hasidus was in earlier generations, before our time, before the war, when there was a head rabbi who was really the boss who people looked up to, and he stood out.
Ted, I have news for you. It's not just before the war, right? This was in 2017. You can just take your car, a bridge over.
You're right. It's
alive and well.
Right. But that seems
changes
to me
in Chassidut. There's no doubt. Really, I can see I'm going to need not 2 or I'm going to need 3 hours of Citron. So this might be a shir that might need to be continued. But at the core of today's shir is, to what extent is this doctrine of the tzaddik that clearly is bothering Shai and Daniel, to what extent is it at the heart of Chassidut? And something that's interesting to note is the Besh does not speak about a tzaddik. And even the Magid does not speak about the doctrine of the tzaddik. When he's spreading his teachings, that's not one of the things he's spreading. He's spreading the teaching of Dveikut. He's spreading the Avodah B'Gashmi, worship through corporeality. It's only in this third generation, in Rav Levi Berdichev's generation, that you both start to have the social phenomenon of tzaddikim, and that's because it becomes decentralized. And you start also having theological writings. So the first writing I was going to show you today is of the Noam Elimelech, who writes an entire book. So Shai and Daniel, if you don't like it, you might not like this book, but an entire book, the Noam Elimelech, devoted to the Hasidic doctrine of the tzaddik. It's not just something that happened, because of circumstances, right? There's a deep theology behind it. But Flatto, who always has good things to say. Abba, this is my father. So
to compare the Carlebach Shul with the Bobov. The Bobov, there are hundreds of people, and so they can not all be participating. And basically, I think the idea by the Bobov is also the continuity of the Hasidus. No, I think it's an unfair comparison to compare the wedding of the Bobov with what's happening in the Carlebach Shul.
Well, I don't know. Maybe Rav Citron is hoping for masses, you know?
It's
Who
just
knows?
the same thing, period.
No, but look, no one's asking
To our
you to.
slichas,
We take COVID very seriously.
come to our concerts, you know, where we have the space, you'll see everybody participating, 1,000 people.
But I don't think it's just a matter of scale. I think there is something about the tzaddik. Even if the tzaddik would have a smaller group, there definitely is something in the doctrine of the tzaddik that is elitist. It's not, right, that he is spiritually superior, right? Now, by the way, to be fair, what's going on in that scene? Maybe we need to unpack it. If you're a Baba or Chassid watching this, you're not just resentful, Shai, right? That how come he has a nicer coat and his daughter gets a better wedding?
Granddaughter, it's him, it's the Rebbe with his.
What are most people thinking? Are people who choose to participate, or who come Friday night to the Tish to get the shiarayim, the leftovers, right? They don't think, oh, we're just getting the leftovers, poor us, right? What are they thinking?
They're glad to be there.
I think more than that, I think they're experiencing actually the actual devekut, and I think I saw that film in the Israel Museum a few years ago on Hasidus, the idea of uniting with the Shekhinah, and like the Kala represents something. And so they're all partaking in this, and they're hanging on to the coattails of the Rebbe. I mean, even in the Carlebach Shul, with my humbleness, I've been there before, I live in Memphis, but Shlomo Carlebach is a friend of Levrach. We all have, the leader is somebody who we learn from. So is it a elitist, that we get stories from, even the Baal Shem Tov stories that grew up from him. I'm wondering did the followers create this, around him? So
by the way, I like many of your points, but especially even the stories. You could say stories is something everyone can relate to, so in a way that's popular. But there's something elitist. Usually you're telling a story of this great, rabbi who you're trying to imitate somewhat. It's almost impossible.
Can I say something?
Sure. Beatrice.
So, bracha. So,
sorry, I'm just reading the.
Yeah, understood. So, it's interesting that I didn't even think of the role of the tzaddik, because I'm so connected with Carlebach Hasidus, which is not just a small amount of people in a previous non-pandemic era in the Carlebach Shul, but it's a movement that's all over the world, like Hasidus. It just spread like wildfire. And part of the reason that it was able to spread like wildfire is because it's so participatory. Because Reb Shlomo made a point of having everyone consider themselves to have something to contribute. Right. And have a voice.
I think it is, I like your point, Bracha. I think we do have to note that very few people would say, I'm a Rav Shlomo Chassid, right? You might say, I go to the Shlomo Chassid. Whereas we do have to acknowledge that it's not only Hasidus that many people feel close to, but it's their actual group, right? They'll say, I'm a Vishnitz Chassid, I'm a Baba of Chassid, and that means a lot of things. First of all, in the early stages, what did that mean? What did you do on your Chagim? You went on pilgrimage to the Rebbe's court. You didn't spend it necessarily with your family. So bracha, it looked a little bit different. It also meant that you would often go to ask for a bracha from the Rebbe, and you also supported the Rebbe. And I actually think this is something that's nice. They had this notion that the Rebbe shouldn't live right in poverty, right? The Rebbe should be supported comfortably. And you see, right, he's dressed. One of my colleagues wrote a book called The Men of Silk, right? The Hasidim appreciate material matters, clothing, and the Rebbe has especially important garb. So whether we
got that from the Kohen Gadol, that the Kohanim had to contribute to his, it says, Gadol Me'achiv, the Gemara says they had to contribute to making him bigger in wealth as well.
Right, so I just want to say, I hear you, Bracha, and I think many of us feel the way you do. And I think it's interesting that this doctrine only emerges at the third stage. So it doesn't emerge in this, if you're familiar with the stories and the Toldot and the Magid, you're not even going to come across this idea of the Rebbe.
I just want to say one thing.
At the time, and I'm getting so close, and there's so much to say. So this is what I say to my students, by the way, just a shout out to my college. I'm at Brooklyn College, not Queens College. even though Queen College is a fine school too.
I think there is some anti-elitism.
Does anyone have a burning comment to make?
Could I ask?
I just wanted to also say
Wait,
that.
who's speaking? Bracha?
Yeah, I
Go
just
ahead.
want to also say that that brachas did not just come from the Rebbe in Carlebach Hasidus. There's an ethos that's opened up our ability to give brachas to each other.
So I would say something
that
we're finding
everyone
out
has
today.
that power.
Well, we're finding out today that Reb Shlomo was unique in that he's really tried to combine
That's what I wanted to ask.
The Hasidus of these different generations.
Could I?
I think Breslov also is part of the movement, not for elitism. They're called the Toita Hasidim for a reason, because if your Rebbe is gone, then you have no Rebbe, then everyone has the Rebbe in their head.
Well,
and
one can make an argument either way, right? Either
not
the Rebbe...
a boss situation.
By the way, I've given this shiur before, and one of the models I speak about Rav Nachman. In some ways, Rav Nachman is an extreme Rebbe, right? Not only is he a Rebbe, but he sees himself as a Mashiach. You're talking about subsequent generations. I actually decided to take that part of the conversation out because I thought let's really focus. He's not a direct disciple. So I thought let's focus on Rav Levi Berdichev's disciple. So why don't we at least get to one or two texts? So one of must go to Uman, exactly. Why not? I just got a message from one of you. Okay, so I'm going to my source sheet, which is 4 pages long. I don't think we're going to get to all of it, but I could at least walk you through. Rav Naftali, you'll tell me when time is done. I'll just show you a map very quickly to give you a sense of how quickly Hasidut spreads. You can see in this first stage of the Besht, Hasidut is mainly in the north, whereas in the second stage, look how far it is gone. It's gone to Poland, to what's now Hungary, to what's now Romania. And the other thing you notice, and I circled for you, is with the death of the Maggid, you have this proliferation of Hasidic courts. And so, for example, you have the court in Liadi, right? That's Chabad. You have the court in Lashings. You have the court in Lublin. So you have various courts, and this all happens incredibly fast. And bracha, a little bit to push back, most of the Hasidic followers see themselves as Hasidim of a Rebbe, not only, and Hasidim that believe in a new kind of, privileging of certain doctrines. But this doctrine is accepted quite fast. Of course, there's a pushback. The Menagdim have a really hard time. And as you know, starting in 1772, the Vilna Gaon and others put the Hasidim into Cherem. They put a ban, and one of their big issues is this new institution of the tzaddik. So let's at least get to one text. So I would say for those of you who are not happy with the idea of the tzaddik, that would be Shai and Bracha, and who else is in this group? Daniel. Again, the Noam Elimelech might not be for you, but he's obviously a very important voice in Hasidut.
I want to go on the record. I am not against tzaddikim.
I'm teasing you. Actually, someone also, who just spoke before? Who's the last person who spoke? Who said about attaining dveikut? That you attain dveikut through the Rebbe at the weddings.
I said that. Maybe
What's
I
your
don't
name?
know if I said it. I wanted to say it, but I don't know if I did.
No, but someone said it. She was that it's actually a way many people can feel spirituality. Anyway, I'm giving credit to the last person who said it. One of the issues that the best students are going to have to deal with is as this movement spreads. So Naftali, maybe as your shul gets bigger and bigger, you might have to deal with these issues more and more. He's not even smiling. To what extent are, Daniel, you say you like it because Hasidut seems accessible to everyone. But the
Should
question is, to what extent are these goals really accessible to everyone? Not even talking about elitism, talking about who can really achieve it. So starting with Dveikut, I know my guess is many of you meditate, do yoga. We all know how hard it is to concentrate, right? To banish extraneous, the idea of just focusing on God and nothing else, and almost annihilating yourself, right? Which is one of the teachings of the Maggid. That's not something easy to do. And that's certainly not possible to do if you have a day job, right? You need to be involved. If you're a doctor or a business person or whatever, right? You can't be focusing on cleaving to God all day. So that is one of the issues the Hasidim are dealing with, is how do we toe the line? How do we stick to these principles, but allow it to be a mass movement? And that's going to be even more true with this idea of worshiping in corporality. So I think for many of us, especially moderns, right, what's so attractive about Hasidut is that it doesn't deny the body, right? You're going to worship God with your heart and soul. On the other hand, we all know that the body tempts, right? And, can we all say that when we're at the Carlebach Kiddush, or at the Carlebach Kiddush, yes, but maybe at another kind of party, then every morsel that we're eating, we're really focusing on how this is a product of God's bounty and we're cleaving to God through this food. That's a hard thing to do. And so that's something that the Hasidim are struggling with. And you'll see someone like the Noam Elimelech, he is going to propose a certain solution. My guess is most of you won't like it, but nonetheless. So who wants to read? I don't see you, so you have to volunteer to Ellie.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
Actually,
I wanted to say,
Ted, after you're done, we really have to wrap it up.
Okay.
So,
I'll just walk you through the other text. I feel like let's at least read one text.
I'll make this very quick. I just think that it's important to remember that this has to be considered not in a vacuum, but in terms of time and changing times, and that the way things were in the 19th century maybe encouraged, one type of structure with a big Rebbe. As Shlomo, I think himself said, this is no longer the time of Rebbes, but the time of friends. I think he said something to that effect.
Yeah.
That we have to rely on each other, and
So
that reflects
Ted,
the times.
Question for me, I like it. The question for me as a historian is, to what extent was Shlomo being actually truer to Hasidic teachings? That actually Hasidic teachings changed in the third generation because it became a mass movement, and they just had to deal with the historical context that not all these people could attain these heights. That really the Rebbe was going back to the best, or not. So that's what I'm dealing with today as a historian.
I'd say it's a two-track thing rather than a one-track thing now. It's the old way with a new way, and they both exist side by side.
Yeah. And so, and look, the issues that these Rebbes are dealing with are real tensions. Even if you want it to be a mass movement, right? We have to concede on some point that this is a hard, if you're really going to live the Hasidic life, it's a struggle. It's a challenge. And so that's something I think just worth noting. Okay, who wants to read?
I can read
this piece just quickly.
Lenny,
So this is the
Lenny.
Tzaddik Eats.
Lenny, I can read.
Lenny,
Tzaddik Eats. Okay. The Tzaddik while praying is, of course, in a state of Dveikut and sanctity and pure, clear, and pellucid thought.
Clear.
When he eats, since eating is physical, it is as if a sword were hanging above his head, lest he become grossly material and be cut off from holiness, heaven forbid. So while eating, he strengthens himself and strives to sanctify himself evermore in order to bind himself to God with great attachment and dveikut. Thus, while eating, the tzaddik sanctifies himself even more than during prayer. However, this is not the case with other people. They are better able to sanctify themselves while praying than while eating.
Okay, so this is, I always tell students that, every solution answers a problem and creates other ones, right? So clearly the Noam Elimelech is addressing an issue, right? That Hasidut is very radical and it's very bold, and it has this idea that you can reach God through food, through sexuality, right? Through nice clothing, through dance. But there's the fear that people, will get carried away. So how does a Noam Elimelech solve the problem? What does he say? He says, avodah shebagashmiut, that worship through corporeality, it's too dangerous. The slope is too slippery. Let's keep that for the tzaddik. Now, Ted, just so that you feel better, right? Clearly, Hasidim continued to sing and to dance and to eat. So no one took this 100% to heart, but I think it served as a warning that people should, moderate themselves and maybe, right, have this sense of humility, that this is spiritually hard stuff, and that in some of the most, tempting things we might leave for the tzaddik. Just very quickly, because we're out of time, this is a beautiful piece that you could look at on your own. One of the other key new teachings of Chassidut was not only that you should worship in the material, but that even when you're tempted, even when you have evil thoughts, right? You should, very psychoanalytic, right? You shouldn't repress your thoughts. You should let all your thoughts of all your desires and jealousies, right? You should let them percolate. And eventually you should be able to use that kind of passion for good. So that's called the Ha'alat Machshavot Zarot. And interestingly enough, his student, this is another contemporary, Rav Meshulam Feibish Heller, who writes, he's strong. He says, here, I'll put do you see the cursor? Rav Dov bears advice about how to bring the precious out of the cheap by making the substitution is only relevant for someone who is completely separated from the material world. Let me continue, push it down a little bit. 1 second. Material world. Although an occasional thought of evil may enter his heart. Okay, so he's saying that basically this idea of machshavot zarot is not really for the masses. That the only person who really can do this is the Rebbe. Right, he's saying there are few, so there's a little bit of a compromise, Ted, right? He's saying there are few individuals who can do this, but most people can't. So it's already interesting. By the 3rd generation, you have quite a few tzaddikim who are starting to limit these teachings. And then I will just show you, so look at that source. It's actually quite interesting. He quotes the Maggid on Halat Machshavot Zarot, and then he says, okay, but don't try this at home. Don't do this on Zoom. I shouldn't even make that joke nowadays with all that's going on.
Could you send a link to this?
Zoom. But he's basically saying that Chassidut has these very daring new teachings, whether it be Dveikut B'Gashmiut, Halat Machshavot Zarot, but let's focus on the easier ones. And then this is one of the best sources, so I feel bad that we're using this in 2 minutes. But one of the other great things about Chassidut was not only, as I said, not only did they think that the tzaddik represented the people on high, but the tzaddik also descended, right? That's something notable. The tzaddik also talked to the people about their issues about parnasa and, their financial issues and their marital issues. So in that way, there was a closeness. I don't know how Shlomo worked on that front, but right, the relationship certainly went both ways. But here's a fascinating a letter, and again, we don't have time to read the whole letter, but this is the letter from the Baal HaTanya. This is the letter from the first Lubavitcher Rebbe. And Ted, if you wanted to make the case that things have really changed, you cannot make a better case than here, but here in the opposite direction. The Baal HaTanya, some of you might know, he wrote the Tanya because he felt that Chassidut was becoming too lax, that it also needs to focus on the intellectual component, that you can't just worship with the emotional, it also has to have a rational, and therefore he wrote a book for everyone to read, publishing a systematic book of Hasidic philosophy, very radical, in 1797, which really opened it up. And so he was not an elitist, interestingly enough, even though he's promoting study, which you might think is elitist, but he thinks everyone should be able to do it through books. And it's not something preserved for the elite. And in fact, at some point he says, here, I'll just read the end, but this whole letter is so beautiful. He says, I can't take it anymore. I can't take being a tzaddik. I can't take being responsible. Who was the one who said it? For the spiritual welfare. I don't want to be dancing at that wedding and having to make sure that you're all getting your spiritual fix through me, right? You all need to do it on your own. And here, I'll just read the last passage. He says, I'll read the first passage because it's too good. You just have to see it for 2 seconds. Here, what does he say? Greetings of peace and life without end. I have an urgent request for all my friends and those who love me. I'm going to skip around a little bit. Especially those who come from the Holy Land. Please, I'm here. Please take great care, as if it were a matter of life or death, to stop God's people who are traveling to go to our place and warn them upon their souls not to cause me grief by coming here at the wrong time, right? Tell them to stop coming, right? It is simply impossible for me to meet personally, yichud, with everyone who assembles here on the 4 occasions, right? Different holidays, people would come. He's like, I can't do it anymore. This system is not working. And he says at the bottom, here, just because we don't have time, I can no longer endure the sorrow and bitterness caused by those who come here to tell me about all their troubles. Those of you who are therapists might relate to this, right? And make me share their sorrows, or parents, right? I can no longer endure those who even come to ask me advice on matters that are not tragic and do not concern troubles. Can no longer endure all the confusion, and here's fascinating, and interference with my worship of God. Is dangerous. The tzaddik, right? God, you're telling me that I have to go down to the people and get into the nitty gritty. Well, that I can't be focusing on dveikud all the time. So we all are, and so here he ends. What he says, may God increase your numbers tenfold, and give you his blessing so that you remain at home. This is not the letter you want to get from your aunt, right? When you tell them you're about to visit. Make it impossible for me to consider my problems in the depth required. If I am to provide correct answers. So interestingly enough, and Ted, here's sort of the reversal. Very different from the Elimelech of Lishon, the Maggid was much more populist. And he believed that the tzaddik is not an intermediary. The tzaddik is not going to do religion for you. He's not going to do dveikud for you. The tzaddik is a teacher. The tzaddik is an advisor. And the tzaddik also has their religious struggles. And so that was one impetus for writing the Tanya. Stop coming to me. I'll give you the teachings in print. I'll give you the notes. Don't come to my classes, right? And it's fascinating because if you think about what happened 7 generations down, right, that the Rebbe, right, for many people is close to God and the Mashiach, and so Chabad takes a dramatic turn in the other direction. When people are standing, people who aren't even Hasidim stand online, right, to get his bracha, whereas the Tanya is saying, don't come to me. Okay, wait, so I'm going to close this share. If anyone has a burning point, or otherwise I will just
have to wrap it up.
What was the question? What was the point about Machshavot Zarot? Could you just repeat that quickly?
So again, what really distinguishes, in the beginning I asked you what distinguishes Chassidut. And the truth is that many of the things that we think distinguish Chassidut are not necessarily unique to Chassidut. They were in other forms of Judaism as well. But there are certain doctrines that are unique to Chassidut. So one of them is worship through corporeality. Another one is Ha'alat Machshavot Zarot. That if you look at older Kabbalistic texts, one of the main premises of older Kabbalistic texts is that if you want to attain dveikud, if you want to, more like yoga, if you want to focus on God, you have to banish all foreign thoughts. Certainly all sinful thoughts, all evil thoughts, but you have to get into the Zen state, right, where you're focusing totally on God. In fact, the Maggid says that you're supposed to almost annihilate yourself, right? You're supposed to become ayin. almost like nothing. The ani should become ayin. And one of Chassidut's radical teachings is that that's not necessarily the case, right? Just as you worship God both with the material and with the spiritual, so too you're, again, going back to an older Jewish idea, right? That you have to worship God both with your Yetzer HaTov and your Yetzer Hara, but they're taking it a step further, right? Even with your thoughts to do evil. All those machinations you have because of your envy, because of your lust, take that energy, focus on it, dwell on it, don't repress it, and then use that same kind of energy for your Avodat Hashem. Meshulam Heller is saying that's a very nice idea, but that's way too dangerous. Let's limit that for the tzaddik, which is quite radical because he's a disciple of the Maggid. Yeah. Any other burning questions?
Okay.
Just because I'm looking at the time.
I just want to say also, I'm also for the tzaddik.
So I think we have to wrap it up now.
Okay.
Okay.
So what I tried to do today was just introduce you to some of the contemporaries of Rav Levi of Berdichev. Unfortunately, I couldn't be here for the earlier part. My son had an open schoolhouse, so I can't completely compare what was said today. But I hope this provided some interesting comparisons for you, right? Rav Levi of Berdichev is not, doesn't emerge in a vacuum. He too is a follower of the Maggid of Mezerich, who himself was a follower of the Besh. And the big question is, how much did these followers change? What we know, sort of facts on the ground, is that this, both the doctrine of the tzaddik and the social position of the tzaddik did not exist until this third generation. So Rav Levi of Berdichev is part of this, whether you like it or not, right? He's a tzaddik who has followers. But to be fair, even among the students of the Maggid, and they all became tzaddik, most of them became rebbes themselves, there was a range of opinion, right? Some of them thought, like the Noam Elimelech, that they were going to be the conduits to dveikut for the people. And other people, like the Baal HaTanya, thought, no, they're just going to be the teachers for the people of this new spirituality, which should be accessible to everyone. So very different opinions. So, and especially I see in this audience, many of you are taken more by the Carlebach model. So you should know that you have a leg to stand on, both if the Besh really, there's a debate among scholars whether the Besh was elitist or not. I'll leave that for another day. I just can't help myself. I'll just say in a second. How could the Besh have been elitist? The Besh tells everyone you can attain dveikut, worship through corporeality. The question is, who was his audience? Was his audience his little elite group? Then maybe it wasn't so. Or was his audience the mass following? So that's the debate. But if you believe that indeed his audience was the mass following, then Rav Shlomo went back to the roots. And even if you think he was perhaps more elitist, he's following more in the footsteps of Baal HaTanya.
Thank you, Sherry.
And if nothing else, I hope, even if we don't believe in the tzaddik, even if we don't adhere to the Noam Elimelech's notion of the tzaddik, I hope at least his teachings humble us a little bit and make us think about a lot of these doctrines that actually sound easy. Singing and dancing and eating, nice clothes, right? That's the way to spirituality. I'm in. And just, it's a little reminder that they're not so easy, and there could be a slippery slope.
Oh, thank you. Beautiful.
Thank you.
This guy,
brother got married, right?
Yeah, and I think he's on it. David,
He's on it.
David on it.
He was on it. He was helping my dad.
Professor Flatto's on the same Zoom session. That's a big deal.
Tell him Mazel Tov.
Mazel Tov.
Okay, and hopefully one day we'll learn these texts together, but please feel free to look at them. They're beautiful texts.
Thank you. Thank you. A wonderful presentation. I think people got more than they bargained for here.
Yeah. Could you send a link of
We
the,
learned a lot.
Okay, and hopefully, Rav Citron, can you also send an email with the source if people want?
yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay, we'll send, yeah. Okay, well, thank you everyone for participating. I know it was kind of long, but hopefully beneficial, and really happy that everyone was able to.
New York 10024.
You know,